Right, so welcome to our March executive meeting. We are at the John Meikle Room at Dean House in Taunton. I'd like just to take the opportunity to remind colleagues that only executive lead members present in the room are taking the decisions in this meeting. Others in attendance are here to provide advice to the executive. The agenda and papers for this meeting have been published on the council's website in advance of the meeting. And just to let folk know that we will be making a recording of the meeting, which will be published in due course. So today's meeting will be run using a hybrid format. Only those executive lead members and key officers present in present in the room will be taking part, but other elected members and officers may physically or remotely join the meeting via the medium of Teams, here to speak or to observe. This meeting is being broadcast, so there may be members of the public who are online observing the meeting remotely. In terms of the online function, please only use the chat function for the purposes of this meeting and to indicate that you wish to speak, though I do prefer a hands up, so that I'm not having to look at extra screens, if that's okay. And please only speak at my invitation. Can you say your name before speaking? And please ensure that any microphones and cameras are off when not speaking, please. So we have apologies for absence. I've got Ollie Patrick and Nick Clark on my list. Are there any other apologies for absence that we've had? Okay, thank you very much. And our item 2 is minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of February 24. Okay, am I seeing any comments, questions or observations on those minutes? Liz, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to make the point, Chair, that they are published, the minutes, they're published under the heading of the February executive meeting. I've read them. They're very long, as it was a very long meeting. So congratulations to whoever wrote the minutes, with or without help of Copilot. And I'm happy to propose them as a true record.
Okay, and I'll second for that, Councillor Wilkins. Any comments or questions around the room or online? Not seeing any. So those executive members in favour, please. Those against, that's clearly carried. Any declarations of interest aside from those listed as City, Town and Parish Council declarations? Not seeing any, which brings us on to public question time, item 4. We've had one member of the public put in a public question. That will be considered under item 7, the budget monitoring report, unless Nigel, you'd like to do it now.
No, well, we get but item 7 is fine.
Okay, that's super. And Councillor Dance?
Could I ask IT to turn that sound off on that screen, because it's really getting in my ear, because I'm hearing you twice, and that is not a pretty thing for my ears. Thank you.
I'm sure we can facilitate that, so long as members on that side of the room can hear more easily. Is that better? Yes, it's much better. It's sort of echoing around. My words are echoing around Somerset, obviously. I can understand where that would be a hardship. And so we move on to item 5, which is the executive forward plan, which is before us for notes. Any comments from executive lead members or associate lead members, or indeed any other members in the room or online? No, not seeing anything, so that just requires us to note, which brings us on to one of our highlights of the year, which is the annual report of the Director of Public Health, which is always a really good read. I would recommend it to anybody who perhaps isn't a reader or a regular subscriber. That it is always worth having a good look at. So, Councillor Adam Dance, you can make
Yeah, I'll just
introduce and then
introduce why Trudy and Alice moved to position. You know, always my feelings have always been with becoming one unitary. I much preferred having separate councils, but on this point, actually, one of the real benefits of developing a unitary council is the factor that influencing our health and well-being is now under one organisation, which I think is really important. That really is a bonus from becoming a unitary. We now have a real opportunity to join up housing policy and the public health game, which we obviously didn't have before, but also to add to that, it's good that we can have some influence in licensing as well. The opportunity to join up housing policy in the public health game, and this annual public health report sets out what we should focus on. We are excited to be working alongside planning and housing to really maximise the health and well-being for local people through housing for the long term. And I'd also echo Bill's comments. Trudy and Alice have done a great job on this report. It's a really, for someone with dyslexia, it's a really easy read, and it is right to the point. So thank you very much for bringing this report today, and I hand over to Trudy and Alice.
Thank you very much. So I can't see those slides, but if you could move them on at the right times, that would be great. Okay. So the annual report of the Director of Public Health, as you all know, is an independent report on the health and well-being of the population. There's a big data set that goes behind this annual report, which doesn't come to the public meetings necessarily, but is available on the website. It's an independent view of the situation, and it's meant to be in areas where we want to push the boundaries a bit. It's not meant to be where everybody else is working. It's meant to be where everybody else isn't working, so as we can push and improve. If you move on, I've wanted to do an annual public health report on housing for a long time, but circumstances over the last few years haven't necessarily enabled us to do that. But actually, it's quite good timing now, because we're just moving into a time when we're looking at the new local plan for Somerset. And so we've really looked at this issue with regards to influencing the new local plan, which needs to be done by 2028. There's a number of key messages that we want to pull out, and we've made there's 10 recommendations at the end of the report, which we're putting both to the council and to the Integrated Care Board. But really just getting into some of the details. So homes as we've seen in the last few years actually are a really important foundation for our health and well-being. And you just need to look at Maslow's hierarchy of need to see that homes and shelter are right down at the bottom, basic need for the population. And certainly over the last few years, we have seen that our homes are really important to how we cope with natural incidents like pandemic, but also how we use our homes for sheltering at times when we need. And Somerset has been brilliant in stepping up to things like the Ukrainian challenge. And providing support and shelter for people fleeing from different issues going on across the world. One of the things that we really wanted to do, we could have focused on one particular issue for housing because it's such a huge issue and it's got such massive crossover between health and well-being. And we did look at a number of other public health reports in the past that have looked at housing, and they have focused on one issue. But we've decided that we wanted to do more of a high level look at health and housing because we want to influence the local plan, and the local plan has many facets to it. So it's very deliberate that we kept it at more of a high level rather than going for a deep dive into one particular issue around health and housing. So we've got, there are three different elements, three different chunks of the report, one looking at affordable and stable homes, one looking at good quality and suitable homes, and one looking at healthy neighbourhoods and what we need to be doing, particularly through planning, to make sure that we foster good, healthy behaviours as much as we possibly can and make the healthier behaviours the easier behaviours. Okay, enough from me. I'm going to hand over to Alice, who's going to take us through just a little bit of the detail in the report.
Thank you. So I'll just go over those three key themes and pull out some of the key findings and messages and recommendations from them. On the first one about affordability and stability of homes, as you'll all be aware, housing is very expensive in Somerset, and buying the average home is over 9 times average incomes in some parts of the county. So it has huge implications for average as well as low income households. And that's also driven more people to live in the private rented sector. So 1 in 5 households is now in that sector. And there's good evidence in health literature that living in the private rental sector and the insecurity that comes with that means you're more likely to live in a non-decent home, which has health implications, and the insecurity and stress it creates can also have mental health implications. It's been compared with smoking or unemployment, actually living long-term in insecure accommodation. And so the shortage of affordable housing is a driver of poor health, both due to its direct health effects if people tolerate poor living conditions, and indirectly are its effects on mental health and stress and insecurity, as well as people's disposable income for other essentials, which can also impact their health. And so at the sharp end, that means we're less able to meet the needs of people who've got multiple disadvantages and complex needs, such as mental or physical health issues or disability, and who are more at risk of becoming homeless. And we know the typical person applying for social housing in Somerset is a young adult, under 35, and often with 1 or more mental health or care needs. And only a minority of those people will be able to get a stable home through Home Finder Somerset. And so while it's clearly a very challenging time, some of the recommendations include that the local plan needs to really consider the health needs and demographic trends in the county and the type of homes we need and where, in order to plan for demographic change and the needs of our changing population. And we also need to really prioritise collaborative work across the system to address the needs of people who experience multiple disadvantage as well. On quality and suitability, on the slides, there's points here about housing quality issues like damp and mould and fuel poverty. And these are related. They raise the risk of heart and lung disease. And the most vulnerable groups are young children, older adults, and people with certain long-term conditions. And those same groups are also at risk from physical hazards like fall hazards and unintentional injury in the home. So those are themes that are elaborated in the report. And on suitability of homes, we've got an increasing number of older adults in Somerset and increasing numbers of very underoccupied homes. So while we have a shortage of affordable homes that particularly impacts young adults, we actually have oversupply of larger homes that are massively underoccupied. And there's an interesting, actually on the previous slide, the occupancy category, that is much higher than average rate of underoccupancy compared with the average for England. So recommendations here include that the ICB should continue to support retrofit interventions and housing adaptations that allow people to live safely in their homes, and that we expand approaches. There are things like personalised care and complex care teams in Somerset that really support individualised support for people to meet their needs holistically and enable them to live safely, independently in their homes for longer. And then the final theme is healthy neighbourhoods. And this graphic just really, I won't go into the details, but it just displays the number of different ways in which the home and the built environment can impact on health, and how we can create neighbourhoods that enable people to live safe, independent, healthy lives for as long as possible. And the local plan is our key lever for thinking ahead, as well as the neighbourhood plans in the interim period between now and 2028, to involve communities in thinking about how we design neighbourhoods and homes to meet the needs of our current and future population. And the recommendations are here, but they're also listed throughout the report, which you should have seen in advance. So I'll now hand over to you for questions.
Thank you, Trudy and Alice. And I'll see Dixie and Heather first. So, Councillor Darch.
Thank you. I found this a really fascinating read, and as Adam said, it's incredibly clear. It kind of put a lot of stuff that I have a hunch about, but it made it very clear and evidence based. And you know, it would be great if some of the public could read it. You know, some of the statistics are quite disturbing. I was really shocked to read that the average age for death amongst homeless people nationally is 45, age 45 for men and 43 for women in 2001. It's just kind of really, really shocking. And also that Somerset has, we've got like above average health related issues for cold and damp kind of compared to national. So it's quite disturbing in many ways. And I think it's encapsulated some of those very specific problems like under occupancy of big houses, but also a shortage of smaller houses really well. I think it also highlights just how connected in a way everything is. So like, you know, we have housing is dealt with separately and climate change and everything, but it's all integrated, and particularly the knock-on effect of housing on things like a disincentive for retaining a younger workforce. And that's one of the things as a council we know that we really need to resolve. So I think the timing is great around the local plan. And from a climate change point of view, I was really pleased to see very firm evidence of the wider benefits of those energy efficiency programs on housing, on health and well-being. So it's not just about reducing carbon, it's absolutely making lives better, reducing NHS costs and all. My question is I just wondered if someone could tell me a little bit more about the Public Health Ambassador Programme, because that's one of the things, one of the recommendations. Thank you.
So the Public Health Ambassador Programme is a new programme. It's part of the new target operating model that we put in place last year. We started last year, we're still getting it in place now. And the idea of the programme really is recognising, as you rightly say, that none of what we do operates in isolation, and actually we all live lives that have a bit of housing in them, a bit of transport in them, a bit of leisure in them, and actually we are the ones that segregate it often. But part of what we wanted to try and do is to have more connection right across the council from public health perspective. And because we've got opportunities to try and influence policy right across all of the determinants of health now with the unitary, it gives us a really good opportunity to make really good links with other parts of the council and make sure that we have maximised the benefits to public health through different types of policy. So, for example, we would really love to have a couple of our planners, for example, that would be public health ambassadors. And the idea of it being that we would work with them and understand their world, them understand our world, and hopefully work together so as we can make sure that health and well-being is embedded in planning, policy and practice going forward. And what we'd really love is the public health ambassador to be spread into lots of different parts of the council where we know that there's a strong influence on health and well-being through the work that they do.
Okay, thank you. And I've got Heather and then Ros.
Hi, thank you both. Excellent report, and the work. I think the work's fantastic because it starts to articulate really the concept that resilient communities are safe communities, are health communities. I think that's a really good thing that comes across in the report, which is lovely. And I think also that the opportunity not just of cross silo working, if you like, within our own council, but then also across the system. I mean, I used to think in terms of with the social work kind of lens, you always think there's no question about care that's not about accommodation, but this actually is in its widest sense. I think it's great. A question I've got really is around the 7th of the recommendations, which is always a bit of a challenge for me thinking about it. Is we do end up with people living kind of in the sort of wrong houses, if you like, perhaps a house is too big or a house is too small, and that they, and that really we need that you have that information campaign to help people understand the benefits of being in the right kind of house at the end, especially towards the end of your life or the beginning of your life. But it's such a challenge when people get actually wedded, hopefully, into their communities. So you might have answered it already with your planning ambassador, but it's this thing about how easy will it really be to help people out of the houses they're currently in and into houses that would be better for them, possibly, and the communities, given where we are with our housing situation?
But I think it is a real issue. We do have an awful lot of people, as we've pointed out, that live in houses that possibly are far too large for their needs, but also aren't necessarily well insulated, not necessarily as maintained as they could be. We've got a lot of older people in this county, particularly who are capital rich and revenue poor, and really struggle to maintain. My granddad, bless him, when he was alive, lived in 2 rooms and in a 5-bedroom house, and we've got an awful lot of people like that in our county. And part of the issue we've got is people know and love their communities, don't they? They want to stay in their communities, and it makes perfect sense from our perspective as well that they stay in those communities because they've got their support mechanisms there. What we don't have enough of is particularly some of the villages that we don't have enough opportunity for people to be able to downsize, and they don't want to live somewhere else, they want to live there, but actually there aren't necessarily some of the opportunities for suitable sized housing, suitable types of housing, lifetime housing that they need to be able to move. And I think a lot of people would choose to move earlier and probably make a more of a proactive decision if they could see that actually there was a 1 or 2 bedroom bungalow down the road that would be great for what they want, and they can stay living with their friends and their networks. So that part of what we want to try and achieve through whatever planning policy we can lever is being able to promote that kind of build, so as we can start to encourage people to downsize their homes when it's suitable for them to do so.
Just add there as well that we touch on design guides in the report as well, which are a requirement of the new local plan. And with the design guiding process, there's the potential to create design codes for different types of areas. So where we know we have high concentrations of older adults and an aging population, we can create codes for developers to build more homes suitable for their needs. Doesn't guarantee they will be built, but it's the lever that we do have that gives us some opportunity.
Thank you. Next I've got Ros and then Sarah, Liz and Adam.
Thank you. And I think this is probably the 10th report I've read over the years of public health, and it's always very welcome. I'm very conscious as being responsible for the new local plan that we have great expectations of this local plan across the whole council, and we have a remarkably tight budget and timescale to deliver. That doesn't mean to say that we don't get the right noises around open market, downsizing opportunities in the rural communities, among other things. But what I would like to see is not just that we ensure the local plan, but how do we actually get the resources from public health and from all the other departments within the council to contribute to what is a very constrained local plan process. And maybe we take it outside this room, but I would really welcome some formal input from public health on this. It can't just be the ambassador's role. It needs to be a lot more than that if we're really going to get a local plan, which we all really feel proud of, because it will set the mark for the next 15, 20 years in our community if we can get it right. So welcome the emphasis on public health, and I would welcome contribution and resource from yourselves as well.
So contribution, absolutely. We want to be playing in this space. So absolutely, we will make sure that there is specialist public health input in the development of the plan. One of the things which Alice is leading on, so I'm sure she'll just fill you in a little bit more, is we were successful in winning what's called a HDRC, which is a health determinants research collaboration. So literally it's 2 months old. It's a 5-year program of work, but really looks at supporting the organisation, the links with the community in looking at how we can embed research and evaluation far more in the wider determinants of health. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about that, but that's also one part of the picture that we could contribute to.
And to add to that, the public health ambassadors will be a key lever of our influence across the organisation for that HDRC, where we're trying to embed evidence-based practice and becoming research active in functions across the council. The ambassadors will be really supported and recruited on their interest in being in that role to understand what's the current practice within their functional areas, and then what could we do to really build capacity to use evidence and do research that's relevant to their area of influence, and which also supports the building blocks of health, which include healthy places and homes.
Thank you. I really welcome having a really proactive public health role in the local plan. I think it's good news for all of us.
Thank you, Sarah.
Yes, thank you. Good morning, and thank you also for this report. It's really interesting, and particularly the housing emphasis I'm really interested in, and I know it's very important in the adult social care field as well. I've got a couple of points I wanted to make. The asset rich cash poor issue, of course, was one of the reasons why the government back in the early 80s abolished the rates, because they thought that was having an effect on people. But actually, perhaps I shouldn't say this, but I actually think it's a good thing if people think, should I really be living here because it's too expensive? And I think that, getting rid of that to allow people to stay when actually they probably should be thinking about moving wasn't necessarily the way public policy should be going. So that's my first comment. The second comment is, because we have an HRA here, I know they've done a lot of work on mold and damp and looking at the properties and making sure that they're up to scratch. So there is a discrepancy between public housing, I think, and probably social housing, housing associated housing, and the private rented sector, where we know there are some terrible stories about people just desperate for a roof over their heads, having to move into somewhere that's completely unsuitable. My point really is, though, there's two things actually. Do you accept that, or do you agree that possibly modular housing or even converted containers, which some councils have been using to find places for the homeless, would you say they were unsuitable, knowing what you know about what happens in housing? Or would you say it's better to have somewhere safe and available to go into, perhaps for people who are completely homeless on the streets, or people who are just about to be made homeless? That's my first point. Because I personally don't think that, for example, that converted office blocks are particularly good, because they're not built for people to live in, but they are doing it a lot now, but they're just, the room sizes and everything are just different from what you'd expect. And the second thing, so that's my first point. My second point is the government are bringing in some changes to landlords and tenants' tenure and security of tenure. They're talking about changing. I think that's a good thing from a tenant's point of view, but how are we going to mitigate the loss of landlords who decide to go out of the market? And have you any ideas about that?
So a lot of those are more specific questions for housing people, I'd say. Bring on the ambassadors. I do have a personal view around the pods kind of approach. I think there is a place for particular types of accommodation, as long as they do meet decent home standards. And actually, just because somebody is in need of housing doesn't mean to say they shouldn't get housing which is suitable and healthy housing. But I think there is something to be said for being able to work with somebody who's currently homeless, if we're able to work with them whilst they're in some kind of stable accommodation. But that stable accommodation can't be bad for their health. We need to make sure that actually it's better than living on the street. So for me, I think there is a case to be had for the pods kind of approach, as long as it's decent accommodation and meets particular standards, I would say. I'm not sure I could answer the other point. I think I would need to refer to housing colleagues, unless you've got a view.
I'm aware that with the office conversions, that's permitted development rights, so the council unfortunately doesn't have a lot of control over office conversions. But I agree with your point that sometimes they're done in a way that doesn't make for great quality homes. Yeah, I agree as well on the pods. That's the nice thing there about those smaller units. They do give people their own space, and a lot of the evidence does show how stressful it is for people to be either forced into HMOs or to live in supported accommodation that's shared with other people with complex needs. And so actually just being able to give people their own space and some privacy is really valuable and important. So there's a case towards it.
I don't know if Chris wants to comment or Ed.
So there was a couple of points picked up on there. So in terms of damp and mould, the council's housing stock, registered social providers have standards that are set. Private sector housing, so the private landlords are required to meet very similar standards. So I think there's a plea here that if you hear about people living in poor conditions, they need to report it to the council. We have the ability to take action against private landlords where they're not meeting their requirements. There was also a point made about the rent reform bill. So that's the bill that's working its way very slowly into potentially becoming an act, and that puts in place some protections for tenants as well as further requirements upon landlords. I don't know whether this is actually going to come into being an act, but its intention is good in terms of protecting tenancies for individual tenants so that they can report matters without the risk of being evicted. So it removes no fault evictions. So section 21, no fault evictions would be removed if that turns into an act. So again, further protections for tenants are built into that proposal.
Thank you, Chris. And Liz.
Thank you. Thank you, Trudy and Alice. Recommendation H is that the council commits to and supports the development of the Public Health Ambassador programme. And I'm hearing in this room a huge amount of support for that. But when we get to item 8 on our agenda, corporate performance report, I do see that it says that that programme is currently on hold due to level of staff reorganisation. So my question is, do we as executive need to do something more than just commit to and support? Do we need to do something more about when that programme can be restarted? I understand the level of staff reorganisation, and I understand where you're talking about working with planning, but do we need to hold ourselves to account more about that programme recommencing?
I don't think so. I can't think of anything that I would ask of you, and I would ask for it if I could think of something. But I I think until we know who's going to be imposed, who's not going to be imposed, I think it would be a bit of a waste of resources at the moment to start that programme going until we've got some stability in the workforce, and then we could really start to build the relationships. I think that a lot of this the Public Health Ambassador programme is going to be about developing relationships across the council, and so actually we could do with some stability to be able to do that first. We're also really up for providing, if people want some training and in public health and things like that, we're really up for that kind of approach. So I think it's just a case of we've got to get some stability in our workforce first. And also, as Alice says, actually, we really want people to be doing these public health ambassador roles that have got a bit of fire in their belly. Actually, we really want people that really want to do the job, because, you know, we could really do with getting the passion for improving health and tackling inequalities right across our workforce. So identifying the right people who are here for the longer term, I think, is the way to go. So I don't think there is anything else, but thank you for asking this.
Thanks. And I've got Adam next.
Yeah, on that last point, Trudy, what is the timescale are we looking at for the ambassadors?
As soon as we know our structures and our structures are in place as the organisation develops, then I think we can start to do that. So we're already starting some of those workforces that are perhaps exempt from the VR process, for example. there's no reason why we can't start to identify some public health ambassadors, and actually have already had some conversations with some public health ambassadors. We've already had a couple of meetings so as we can start to understand what their needs are as well as ours. So I think as soon as the organisation has gone through that that kind of restructuring, then I think we're ready to roll. But we don't have to wait totally until the end, because we can start. So we're really keen to start with public health nurses, for example, because actually that would be a really key workforce for us. But also would be a really good opportunity for us to start the programme, do some initial learning, get the programme more embedded. It's going to be an iterative process. We haven't done one of these, and we don't actually know anywhere else in the country that's doing this either.
Thanks for that. I've got a couple more questions. Another one is for Chris. Chris, you say if someone reports a problem of mould in a private rented house, can you tell me on the timescale this council deals with that case? How soon do they get involved, and how soon do they support that tenant? Because I understand that a lot of our staff are stressed at the minute, so I just want to know on how long timescale are we talking if someone reports it to the council to be investigated?
I'd have to go away and check with the team. I'm afraid I can't give you a timetable right now, but I can do that for you.
Yeah, if you could give me that in writing, that would be very helpful. Thank you. My third comment is regarding housing. I think really one of the biggest issues as well is the fact that developers now don't build bungalows. That is one of the biggest problems, because actually we could do a lot more bungalows in Somerset. So I'd like to see us pushing bungalows in our local plan as well, and obviously making sure that we have houses which are fit for purpose. I actually quite like the container idea. I'd be quite happy to live in a container, to be honest. It'd be quite easy to look after, and it would, I think we should be looking at doing this. We have we spend an awful lot of money on certain things, and actually we could solve the problem with very little money, in my opinion.
I think it was comment rather than question.
Yeah, it was comment,
yeah, that's fine. I just wanted to check that
Make
you
my
weren't
views
looking
clear.
for an answer to those points. I think they were well made. I've got Fed, Val, Dave, and Fran. And yeah, I'll go to other members after I've done executive. Thank you.
Thanks, Bill. I wanted to come in on 2 points. One point Chris has alluded to, but I think that we need to think around our comms piece, around what we can do and the tools that we've got around that kind of environmental health, people reporting to us, because I don't think people realise that is a role that we play. So what we can do around maybe social media posts. I don't want to inundate the teams because we do know how everyone is stretched, but I think people sometimes don't know where to turn, and therefore they do kind of suffer in silence. I think that in relation to modular builds and housing in general, I think we're really lucky to have our HRA account for multiple reasons, and one of that is that we can be a leader in this field and show what can be done and show developers what they can do. So we are bringing the modular housing, and we made that decision at full council on the 20th, 24 units across both the west and the north, and we want to see what we can then do in the wider Somerset area outside of the HRA current kind of geographical areas. But I just think that it's something that we just need to keep on at, raising the case at central government as well as the importance of housing. And I think, Bill, you signed a letter in relation to the bill that is going through Parliament, but it's just so it's important that we use those ambassadors, but also make sure that we educate the public.
Okay, and Val?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to commend this report to all of you and thank Trudy and Alice and the team for the amazing amount of work. I have long advocated that poor housing leads to poor health, and I think the fact that we're highlighting this as a council can only be for the good. As far as modular homes are concerned, yes, bring them on, let's do more of them. I think there is a role here, and we already know at the meeting on Friday, LCNs, we're starting to talk about public health. I think there is a role here for the LCNs to get involved. I also agree with Councillor Dance about bungalows. My division has a high percentage of elderly people who live in very large houses, who'd love to downsize, but they want to stay in their community because their support networks are here, but there are no bungalows being built. So, but I would thank Trudy and Alice and the team for this very impressive report, very detailed report. And I think starting to bring silos of the council together is incredibly important. So thank you all for that.
Thank you, Val. I've got Dave and then Fran.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks, Trudy and Alice. As an advocate of holistic and a joined up way of working, I'm pleased to see that the link has been made between housing and health. So thanks for that. I'd just like to stress that homes need to be affordable. Sorry, Bill, am I talking out of turn?
Yeah, you're just taking away what I'm going to say.
I'll carry on. I just wanted to stress that homes need to be affordable for all. There's a very fine line between attracting people into the county and ensuring local people can afford the home they live in, whether that home is rented or owned. Many communities are impacted by second and vacant homes bought by people who do not normally reside in Somerset, which is a factor which drives prices up and sometimes puts them out of the reach of local people. I know the council is aware of these challenges, which aren't confined to Somerset, and that the council is lobbying central government for improvement. So I'd just like to say that keep up the good work, but we just need to keep the focus on keeping all homes affordable for all in our county. Sorry, Bill.
No, you will be forgiven at some point. Fran.
Yeah. Thank you. This is a really good report, and I'm pleased to see the importance of housing in relationship to good housing. We all seem to be saying the same thing, but I think it needs to be emphasised. And I'm glad to see it's going to impact on the new local plan. I think it's really, really important that it does so. I was supporting the comments that Adam made regarding bungalows, also Val. As a council, we've managed to build some in the North Woolaway project in North Taunton, so that's good that we've managed to find a few. There are a lot of people who are living in that area in 3-bedroom homes who wouldn't want to just downside into apartments and flats. Some may accept it, but when you've had your own 3-bedroom home, you just don't want to necessarily move into flat. And the difficult issue is with the cost of land and building bungalows. So that's what we keep getting told, that it's too expensive to build these bungalows. But I think if you can build perhaps smaller size ones, which you do see in certain areas. I've seen many up in Scotland that they have smaller size properties that are perfectly adequate. So I think that's something that we need to try and encourage developers to do as well, because we're never going to move people out of their 3- and 4-bedroom homes into something smaller unless it's something that they want to live in, and then it becomes too late and too difficult, and hence the issues with health. So I think if we can encourage that through planning somehow, encourage it through maybe our enabling officers through planning as well, I think that would be very helpful. And if we can develop more of our own properties in the future, if we can get enough money for that, that would be another way of helping. But thank you for the report, it's really good.
Thank you. And got 2 other members that have indicated to speak. So Francis in the room.
Thanks, sharing the thing. Thank you very much for this report. Housing and health and well-being, of course, are absolutely inextricably linked for all the reasons that everybody said. And most of what's been said this morning is absolutely right and helpful. Absolutely, the influence on the local plan, hugely important. I wonder, there are people who say the one way to get people to go off their legs is to give them bungalows. And I wonder whether the question of land area
for bungalows might be thought of. It won't be suitable for everybody with small houses that are not bungalows, but not a 3-bedroom house, not a 5-bedroom house, but perhaps a house rather than a bungalow. So work with the local plan, absolutely. Permitted development rights, the office's question, yes. Is there any work that public health could be doing with building regs people? That's just a different way of approaching it. Can't talk about registered providers everywhere, in Somerset, obviously, but not everywhere are they model landlords. And in fact, some of the most egregious cases recently of damage, particularly to children, have been in. This is not a point for public health, but just we ought not to regard registered providers good, private landlords bad. Not only because of the things that Chris has said, but we do need those private landlords. And that leads on to another one of influence that public health could have with the registered providers through allocation arrangements. There are lots of things about health and well-being, like being in your community, like your children staying at their school, like your children not being booted from here to there, which sit perhaps not with the local plan, nor with building regs, but with allocations policies, and so that is a place which I would encourage public health to go. And the questions of people who are not necessarily the tenants that landlords want are the tenants that tend to end up in the private sector. And I have heard housing officers say to me recently that registered providers become extremely picky, and that doesn't feel helpful. And of course, not all registered providers, and I'm not talking about any one of the ones in Somerset, but it's something that I think public health needs to be aware of, because multiple deprivations are absolutely in there. The elephantine memory too that we tend to have about people who have not been good tenants. It may be 10 years ago. Have things moved on? Is there a possibility of change? So again, public health as part of that discussion would be really good. And the last point I want to make about a real role for public health, and a really, really important one that I hope that you will get involved in, which is Somerset does not have one local plan. Somerset has 2 local plans. There is a local plan which is for a part of Somerset, and 4 people at least in this room are sitting on that authority. Its local plan is up for revision soon, will start being revised soon. One of the things that we're talking about is homes for the whole population, the need to downsize. And that means the whole population, not only the population in local affordable need. And one of the problems is showing that you're in housing need if you're in a house, but you may be in an entirely unsuitable house. So there's a great chunk of influence and work that I would really want you to do over that local plan too.
Well, an awful lot of questions, some excellent points. I was waiting for the Exmoor point to come along with terms of the local plan, because that was on my list as well. So yeah, I'm grateful for you to having raised that. Thank you. Have we got some responses?
Yeah, no, well, we'd be very happy to be involved in the other local plan, so to speak. So that's not a problem. I think the conversation about bungalows is quite a useful one, and it sparked a bit of a thought in my head through the HDRC. I think one of the pieces of work that we could usefully do is engaging with people who live in bigger houses that might want to downsize, to see what kinds of things they would downsize to, what would be acceptable to them. I totally agree. The Health Determinants Research Collaborative. So
We need to come up with this catch it.
Yeah, that's nationally what it's known as. It's not our title. It's about looking at what are the influences on health and well-being for a wider determinants of health, you know, education, housing, transport, all of those things that we know influence health and well-being, but making sure that we build and develop the evidence base that we use as a council when we do that. So actually, one initial idea could be that we look to see if we can do some work with people who might live in some bigger housing that would really love to downsize, but actually we need to understand what kind of thing would float their boat, really.
Thank you. And I've got Mark online next and then Mandy.
Yes, thank you. I've got to declare an interest before I start, Chairman, if you don't mind. I'm a private sector landlord, as you well know, and I want to discuss slightly about Section 21. I totally agree that there are private sector landlords out there that are a little bit, I won't mince my words, a little bit iffy, shall we say. I like to think that I'm a responsible private sector landlord, but what the person was discussing earlier, and I'm sorry, I really do apologise, the phone rang, so I got the back end of the comment about Section 21, but what are we going to do about the fact that we do have tenants that actually wreck the apartments or the house they're in? And one of the safeguards about Section 21 is the fact that if you've got a tenant that's actually annihilated the property, it's the only way that we can say, look, we need you to leave so we can re-renovate and let out again. So my concerns are, and I know it's a national issue, you know, I'm part of the Landlords Association, etc. But where do we stop? Where we say, and I've been a part of this personally, if I may say that, where we had tenants in one of my properties, and they got hold of the local authority. They made all sorts of spurious accusations, which was unfounded, and in the end they left, and it cost me, as a private sector landlord, over £10,000 to put the property right. So what I agree totally that a landlord should be a tenant should be protected under Section 21. But where do we draw the line when somebody's wrecked the property and the landlord, a responsible landlord, says we can't put up with this anymore? I just want to know the officer's answer to that question, if I may, Chairman, through you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I think Chris Hall's going to respond.
Yeah, it's a very complex matter. Section 21 and its proposed removal was put in place for a number of reasons, one of which was to prevent landlords evicting tenants purely to raise rents to new market levels. So the intention of removing Section 21 is that catch-all scenario where landlords can remove tenants for any reason, no fault evictions. Section 8 of the Act, however, allows people to evict tenants for non-payment of rents, for antisocial behaviour, for a range of other but specified reasons. The Rent Reform Bill has also been altered in the last week to allow hearsay evidence to be put forward. So one of the points from landlords was those actions under Section 8 are much harder to prove, and therefore landlords traditionally use Section 21 as a mechanism rather than providing the evidence under Section 8. So it is complicated. I think the real question, probably underpinning it, is what's the role of the council? And we need to be absolutely clear that the council has no role in taking enforcement action, in supporting landlords with difficult tenants. We have no role or capacity to remove difficult tenants. It becomes a private matter. Section 8 notices have to be issued and then via the courts for eviction. And this is one of the arguments of private sector landlords, is that the Rent Reform Bill very much favours the tenants. Now, it's right for the tenants to have protections, but it doesn't apply equal protections over landlords, and it relies upon a court system which is heavily backlogged. So complex, difficult, the council doesn't have a role in that part of the process.
Sorry,
Okay. Mark, do you want to briefly come back?
If you don't mind, Chairman, I get exactly what you're saying. Yeah, you know, the Section 8, though, with the greatest respect, now I'm speaking personally, if you don't mind, and I've been through this as well, where it can take up to 2 years to get into court. And you're right, what you said, there's a massive backlog. So you've got a tenant, with the greatest respect, that's not paying any rent. Private sector landlord, responsible landlord, by the way, is 2 years without any. I get where the council's coming from. Don't get me wrong. I understand that totally. But through you, Chairman, if you don't mind, I slightly have to champion a responsible private sector landlord, as I am one. It's a difficult one to do. And I understand where the council's coming from. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark and Mandy.
Thank you, Chair. If you want to look at all shapes and sizes of bungalows, come to Minehead. We have a huge number and a lot of new ones are built and they always sell well and they're always popular, which I think is evidence of itself. And I will bang the drum again for Homes for Life. You can have all the bungalows in the world, but if you're in a wheelchair and can't get through the front door and can't get through any of the doors inside, it's no use to you whatsoever. So I'll bang the drum again. We need Homes for Life. We need homes that are flexible so that whatever your situation in life, you can live there, which for me means putting standard wider doors on everything that's built so you don't have massive change arounds needed as situations change. I'll keep saying that for as long as I'm a councillor. The second thing for me, though, is affordability. You know, in people wanting and needing homes and somewhere to live, with that comes the pressure of being affording to live there. With that comes the bills, with that comes all the rent and the rates and everything else. And for many, it's too much. So for me, it needs to be a hand-in-hand approach, not only providing it, but making it affordable so that people can actually live there. My last question actually is around HMOs actually. I know in many parts of the country, all HMOs are registered by the council. There's a fee that's paid. And that fee means that they are visited, reports are done on them, and it's really quite strict as to the condition. And I would actually welcome that sort of right across the country. I think HMOs are an area that often living situations are difficult, and I think they are something that should be monitored and should be visited by council. So my question is, could we as a council start registering HMOs? There is a hefty charge attached to it, or is that something that's not open to us as a council? Thank you.
I think we've got a mixed inherited pattern from our district predecessors, and I'm not sure where we are with reconciling that on the HMO point. So I'm looking, but sorry, my recollection is we have a mixed inheritance position on the registering of HMOs from our respective district councils.
I need to double check. However, there is a licensing requirement. So if an HMO exceeds a certain number of people within the same property that are unrelated, then it has to be registered as a licensed HMO. I don't think that standard differs across the authorities, but happy to go away and double check.
Really happy to have a conversation. I think it's something we should have everywhere across the council to make sure again that those living conditions are acceptable for those that live there as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, well, Mr. Sharkey, you were twitching and now you're not. That's all right. No, yeah. So yeah, I think the point's well made and taken, and certainly in the travel to work area for Hinkley Point C, it's become a particular issue, the number of HMOs that have sprung up, but also the impact that that's had on the private rented market that goes with it. Because we are, yeah, let's be fair, we are seeing evictions from private landlords in order to convert into HMOs and take the Hinkley Point shilling, and that is understandable, but it has significant knock-on consequences for demand on affordable housing in that travel to work area around Hinkley Point, which there has been some mitigation. Whether it's been sufficient mitigation is an issue that we deal with on a regular basis. Councillor Wakefield, would you like to come back on a point?
Yeah, just the recommendation 9, 3.9 is that the council embeds the HDRC and its principles into the new target operating model for the council going forward. I just think that needs a bit of explanation because I didn't actually know what the letter stood for, and I'd quite like to just a brief outline of its principles before we actually agree to embed them. I'm sure they're great, but I don't know what they are.
Principles of the HDRC are about being evidence informed in your decision making and being research active. So where we haven't got the evidence to inform our decision making, generating that local research to help answer questions. And that's questions spanning all of the so-called building blocks, wider determinants of health, so council functions that have impact on long-term health outcomes, so planning, housing, education, transport, climate and place. All of these council functions and social care have are what we call the wider determinants of health. So the broad principle about being about evidence informed and research active where we don't have the evidence.
So that is something we should be doing, and I'm sure we are, but I just, I just wasn't quite sure because it seems, it sounds like it's something new, but actually it's really something we should and hopefully are already doing, but you just wrapped it in here. That's okay.
Okay, and are you suggesting an amendment to that line, or are you happy now that we've had a bit of
It'd be
context?
helpful to actually say what the HDRC stands for in full. I think it would, yes, that anybody reading this would know what it meant, because I certainly didn't. I've got health determinants research collaboration, was it?
Collaborative. So it's under planning healthier neighbourhoods. So there's a section on there, but we can also provide you with some more information if you'd like it. But there is a summary of it there.
Okay, so I've all sorry, sorry.
I'm sorry, I am concerned, but we have a reference to a new target operating model for the council, and I'm not sure that the new one's been shared as such. And therefore, I would agree with Sarah, this is maybe a tad premature or in some way.
Well, we will be having a target operating model, and I think the language there says that it will be embedded within it. We don't need to see what the model looks like. We just need to give that steer that it's embedded in is how I'm reading that. Yeah. So I think that point is well made, but I think it is covered in the language there. Okay. So it's kind of like a drafting amendment. Could we spell out what HDRC stands for in item I? Do we need to do that as a formal amendment? No. I also have another amendment which involves adding the S to where it refers to local plan. So is that also a drafting amendment? Yeah, that's fine. I think I can only spot two places which is J and B. But if we just nail that point into the proposal, and I know it's just one letter, but it is significant that we need to be looking, to bear in mind we do have a national park. Are we still calling them national parks? I can't remember. AONBs were changed to something else. But yeah, that's right. AONBs have become national landscapes, and I sit on that one now, and no longer the national park. I'm just trying to remember all the committees that I'm on. I think it's been a really interesting debate, and just thank colleagues. There have been lots of really good points made. What particularly impresses me about this is wanting to embed this approach into the local plans going forwards. I think that is absolutely essential that we cover that off. I think there's some really interesting points around affordable housing that has been made. I've made some of the points around the impact of Hinkley Point C, but I think we've got to recognise that the fantastic news about gravity also comes with its own implications for the travel to work area there, and whether we get the housing mix right, which is also around the training mix and so on. If the jobs are for the people who already live here, then the housing need isn't quite so, housing impact isn't quite so significant. I do notice though that we have issues around developments where we've got viability. We had a planning application go through in my patch, which went from 30% viability down to 10%, 30% affordable housing down to 10% on the grounds of viability. Perfectly appropriate decision to make in a way, but entirely regrettable that the local plan was planning for more affordable housing that is no longer deliverable. One of the things that really struck me was the fuel poverty map on page 53. I love a picture and I love a map, and which for me, it was where, in terms of my patch, I instantly looked where it was, and the darker patches weren't where I expected them. And that to me was really interesting. And what made me think, you know, can we try and get this onto the LCN's agenda, this report? Because I think it is something that is really significant to get communities to start to engage with what the health and housing needs are in their own area, so that they can see the strategic picture, so that when planning application comes in for a bungalow which is intended for someone to downsize, they grasp the context for what is being said. So I just think if we can get that onto the LCN's agenda, that would be really good, and fully endorse everything that's been said around the excellent. I'm pleased. I'm on all LCN in this agenda. I'm sure there is excellent practice going on in places around Somerset, whichever local plan they sit under. And yeah, that point around being able to live independent lives and homes being suitable for life, and yeah, that echoes the excellent work that's going on in the North Taunton Woolaway project. I think that's an exemplar of what we want to see. So I'm assuming Councillor Dansby would like to propose
Yes,
the adoption of this report. I don't propose to read through all 10 recommendations as ever so slightly amended. I'm happy to second that. Can I see all those in favour, please? And those against? That is clearly carried. Thank you so much, Trudy and Alice, for all your hard work on this, and we look forward to the impact that this will have on our local plan and our housing right across the county. Thank you so much. So we move on to item 7 in our agenda. I've written in my notes Nigel Bean in big letters, so I don't forget you, Nigel. Nigel, are you on? I'm hoping you're still online and
Yeah,
you are
thanks.
ready and primed with your question.
Thanks.
I'm just looking around and we don't have our big timer clock with us, so I'm just going to have to grab my phone to do the timer for it. And have you got it going? Okay, the monitoring officer has one handy. So ready when you are, Nigel. Thank you very much.
Okay, I'll just summarise. It's about the Adult Social Care Budget Monitoring Report. And so question 1A, is the market sustainability funding partly because of the years of 0% increase in council tax? Question B, well, it's noted historically the authority has paid lower fee rates within this sector. But why is that the case? Why has it been paying lower fee rates? And I'm just suggesting it says and it's still not stabilising the market. And then question 1C is again about My Life, My Future, using consultants in Europe. And is there an element of duplication? Because it seems to be business as usual, and yet they're external consultants. And just asking, well, what will the benefit be? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Nigel, and massively below 3 minutes, which we do appreciate. I think both Liz and Sarah are going to chip in with the answer. Liz, are you first?
Yeah, please. Thank you. And thank you, Nigel. So on question 1A, the 6 years of council tax freeze at Somerset County Council and at some of the district councils between 2010 and 2016 has certainly affected the current council tax rate for Somerset Council. It's interesting to see from the document on council tax trends in Somerset that went to full council, and I will of course include the link in the written answer, that there was actually very little difference between the district rates before vesting day, hence our early harmonisation. That is of course very different in North Yorkshire, where they're still running, I think it is 7 different council tax rates. So the 22-23 districts council tax precept varied from a lowest of 175 to a highest of 182. The county council precept for the same year was 1,394, a much higher amount, of course, for much greater responsibilities in terms of adults and children's services. And it is often quoted that government offered grants in exchange for council tax freeze. The initial scheme in 2011-12 was on the basis of an ongoing amount, but the scheme changed in subsequent years and the grants were one-off. So the base budget of this council does not benefit from them. That means there is a very significant variation in council tax rate between Somerset and other counties. For example, Dorset, where a Band D home in 23-24 has paid very nearly £260 more than a similar home on the other side of the boundary in Somerset. And as the adult social care precept is based on 2% of council tax, both base and rate, that greater income has also been foregone in recent years due to historic lower rates. The other factors, of course, are council tax base, the number of homes in each band, and also the number of people who are self-funders for adult social care, where again we see variations between councils. So put simply, council tax does not work as a funding mechanism because where council tax income is lower, need is generally higher, and other factors and historic decisions create further inequality between council areas. Reform is clearly needed. Thank you, and I'll pass to Sarah Wakefield.
So I was totally remiss at the start of this meeting in welcoming Councillor Wakefield to her new role as lead member for adults, and so I'd like to invite her to add to the answer to this.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for your questions. Your question 2, I would answer as follows. The Somerset adult social care market comprises a mixed economy of providers, ranging from small private businesses, not-for-profit organisations, charities, to regional and national providers. As with other sectors, the care market has seen significant increases in cost, mainly due to rises in interest rates, the computer prices index and national living wage, attributing to an increase in the cost of care. There has always been a cost difference between what councils pay for care and that of self-funders. In fact, I don't think the market would work without that very well. As a part of a government directive, councils undertook a market sustainability and cost of care exercise in 2022. This exercise highlighted the differentiation between what local authorities pay for care and that of a self-funder. With an aim of a sustainable social care market, the cost of care exercise has been put on hold, and therefore councils who carried out this exercise have not received additional funding to enable a stabilisation of approach. As part of the commissioning process, the council will evaluate different models of care delivery, ensuring quality and cost efficiency, and weighing this up against the cost of in-house delivery and outsourced provision. And that will be in writing, that answer. And the third part of your question was about My Life, My Future project, the Newton Europe project. And my answer is as follows. Adult social care engaged Newton Europe in the summer of 2023 to support our transformation programme and ambitions aligned to our adult social care strategy. The organisation provides valuable knowledge, skills, experience and capacity to support the implementation of effective change across our workforce. The My Life, My Future programme is targeted at making sustainable operational changes, which are valued in the range of 14.2 to 17.2 million per annum going forwards, as well as improving the lives of our residents. This follows an evidence-based review of the service, which was undertaken across the winter of 22-23, which identified priority areas for change and improvement. A detailed overview of the background to and progress of this work was most recently presented to the Adults and Health Scrutiny Committee on the 7th of December 2023, and in the written answer there is a link to the papers that were presented there. In addition to the regular progress reports of the Adult and Health Scrutiny Committee and Council's Transformation Board, the Adult Care Service has monthly contract monitoring meetings, fortnightly finance and performance meetings, and a fortnightly transformation steering group established as part of wider governance and oversight arrangements for the delivery of the programme. Progress against operational financial targets is reported to these forums, and benefits associated with the programme are then signed off. The support from Newton Europe is provided on a contingent fee basis. These are fixed and contingent on financial benefits being delivered and signed off by Somerset Council. Newton guarantee that the recurrent annualized benefits delivered in the programme will exceed at least 1.3 times the combined fee from the original diagnosis and programme. As such, the guaranteed benefit is 10 million, and I think it's only fair to say that they have said they will stay with us until we've achieved that target, and that is part of it. So thank you very much for your question.
And yeah, just to repeat our thanks for your question, and you will receive that in writing in due course. So returning to item 7 on the agenda, and I'd like to invite Liz Lyshon to introduce the item and highlight any key points.
Thank you, Chair. So I will just start by saying that this month 10 report does project an overspend of 16.3 million for the current financial year, which equates to 3% of the net budget, and that is a small improvement of 1.2 million from the previous forecast overspend at Q3. I will, if I may, hand over to Nicola Hicks, Service Director for Finance and Procurement, for more of the detail. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lyshon. Can I just actually start by saying a thank you? Thank you to all the members that attended the How to Interpret Budget Monitoring Report session that was held on Monday. We had some really positive feedback after attending that session, and some really positive suggestions about what we could do to the report. So if members weren't able to attend, I believe it is available online. If you just have a glance at, if you've got any feedback, please do feed it back to myself. If there's anything that wasn't raised in the session that you would like to brought to my attention, so thank you for that. Just heading back to the report, as mentioned, the overspend is now predicted overspend is 16.3 million, so that is a positive movement of 1.2 from the prior month. This is actually a 0.4 positive movement from children's and a 0.8 from the remaining of the council. So the positive movement from children's can be seen in table 2 on page 51, which shows the RAG status of green for commissioning and performance in children's services, both favourable movements from month 10. Appendix 2, which starts on page 65, details all the movements in children's, but in terms of the favourable movements, it's around the SEND transport as well as the external placements and field work. Those areas that we report in are causing some of the overspends. We've actually had to, some things in that have been able to mitigate that overspend. Just table 2 goes on to show other favourable movements that make up that 0.8 across the council. This is communities, climate and place strategy, workforce and localities. If you go into each of the appendix, you can see what those services that make up each of those elements are. We can't actually pick them out because in terms of how the services operate, some have an overspend, some have an underspend, and then we just take the balance in under or overspend to feed into the general. So that's kind of why we don't pick those out. But I think as we head towards year end, which I can't believe we're now approaching a first year end, which is quite scary, but we're hoping this positive position can be maintained, if not improved. But obviously with our demand-led services, these have to be closely monitored and along with the mitigations in place. But happy to take any questions that members may have.
Thank you. Just wondering whether any lead members just want to comment on their budget positions, Heather.
Yes, thank you. I was very mutedly happy to see this had happened. I just wanted to point out, I guess, the appendices I think are really brilliant. I think they do help understand a lot more. And I think apart from Federica's, I think we've got like the longest number in children's of lines in that appendix. And that's really helpful. And it's not including things like our DSG and all of those other, that's really what comes out of our council tax allocations, if you like. And so I think it's really good. And I think what it points out is there are all of those levers, there are all those points. And I think you said it beautifully, Nikki, when you said that in this particular month, the efficiencies we've been able to make on some of the other lines has actually mitigated against that continuing pressure in both the cost of placements, residential placements for children, but then also the field, what's described as field work, which is that supporting children in their homes. And those two things are continuing to, to feel pressure. So we're not being foolish about it. We're obviously continuing with all of our financial control boards. We're also continuing with the idea of setting up an overall finance board, again, to kind of monitor our budgets going forward, and certainly into 24-25. So I think it is a good read. I know Claire and the office have been doing some work on the descriptors that follow that big table on at the front of the appendix, just to make sure that it makes sense for people, and and that you're understanding it more. But if there's anything that people don't understand, please, we're more than happy either here or outside of the meeting to help explain what's in that appendix.
And Federica?
I just wanted to come in and, like Heather, just say I really like all the detail that we're now seeing and those appendices. I think we all know, and it's been a well-rehearsed message for people in this room as we sit here in executive, just the challenges that we faced over this past year, and also around having a new financial system and some of those challenges that has brought us. I think we regularly hear in the press around whether or not we are able to financially manage this situation, and that we haven't shown transparency. But when I read these reports, I actually see it through a different lens, that we are demonstrating how the services are doing, and in particular I'll talk about communities, where you can see those different lines of the different services and how those are performing. And we are now showing that as a council, and we were doing it even up until now, but you can see here where you've got that positive, favourable movement, where in the rest of the council, that it is where the demand-led services are causing those challenges about protecting our most vulnerable residents. And that, as Bill has publicly said, nationally, locally, to everyone that will listen, that is where local government needs a complete rethink. So I think we need our MPs and others to continue to champion that message, because we are demonstrating in this report that we are doing everything that we said we would, and it's them to take up that baton on our behalf.
Thank you for those comments. I think I've also been saying it in my sleep as well, but there you go. I just got a question on the adults, and just so that members are aware, Mel, Emily, Paul and Nikki, we've got a peer review at the moment, so they're involved with that, and I'm very aware that Sarah's 2 weeks into the job, and if you want to have a go and hand over, I notice again that on table 1 on page 59 we've got no movement between month 9 and month 10 on any of the lines, and it's, to me, that's eye-catching. Are we happy with the detail there? Is giving us an up-to-date reflection of that, and I'm aware it's an unfair question to ask you this early on, and without officer support, but if you've got any comments on that, I think it would be wise.
Yeah, I think it is holding steady. I think that the thing is that we don't tend to have, and I'm not saying we never have this, we don't tend to have these sudden cases that are really cost a lot of money suddenly being dropped on. I mean, they do happen sometimes, but I think it's holding steady quite well. And I would just point out that we are doing very importantly peer forums and enhanced peer forums on all our care packages, and they are being looked at really carefully by the team. So we are really checking that these care packages are safe, effective, and meet the needs of the person concerned, but that they are costed properly as well. And that exercise is going on, and I think that's helping to keep these costs under control. But I have no other comments at the moment.
I don't know whether Nicola, you want to just come in on that?
I think it is eye-catching, and I think it's around the way that the team are forecasting. But I think what it would warrant, just for clarity, is if I get a written answer to come out to members on the reason behind that.
Yeah, I think I'd appreciate that. It's just when I read through the papers, that's where the asterisk was of, I'm not quite sure about this. So I'll just appreciate just a little bit more detail to explain whether that is, it just means that they're spot on and have been spot on for a while. And if that's the case, then fantastic. But I just don't. I think it's notable that there is a column of zeros there, and I think we need to make sure that that's covered off. I'm not seeing anything further from executive lead members or associate lead members. And now looking around the room for any comments. And online, not seeing any comment on this. So we have a proposal to note the forecast overspend of 3% for the year and the recovery actions being taken and the mitigations put in place to address this. Proposed by Councillor Lysholm, seconded by Councillor Wilkins. Can I see those in favour, please? I see those against. Thank you, colleagues. And we move on to item 8, which is the corporate performance report. And I'd like to introduce Councillor Liz Lysholm to introduce.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm pleased to say that Sarah Cretney is with us today, as well as Alan Jones. This is an area of particular interest to me. There's often so much detail in a corporate performance report that it's easy to miss things that are indicators and trends. And Sarah will report to us on how we're working to ensure that performance, risk and budget monitoring are all being properly considered, and most particularly how they work together. So if that's okay, I'd like to hand over to Sarah Cretney, please.
Thank you, Councillor. Sorry, just get the microphone away. Thank you, Councillor Lysholm. So if I talk about the performance report first, what you've got in front of you is the Q3 performance report for this financial year. And as in similar, the other quarters of this year, we have got a set of operational indicators that go across the council that we're reporting on for Q3. And you'll see that there is a summary table on page 2, which shows a positive picture. So an increase in the number of green indicators from 19 to 28 from the last quarter, and a decrease in the number of red indicators from 17 to 5. So you can see that in the table in section 5. Also in the report, as usual, we have a high-level summary from each of the executive directorates, just highlighting any of the kind of key areas for focus, and happy to take questions on those. There is an appendices as well, which goes into more detail. As Councillor Lysholm mentioned, and I've mentioned, this is an interim reporting process that we've been reporting in this way as we're bringing together services across Somerset Council. We're also working on a much more integrated performance, risk and budget reporting and a corporate performance framework. Last week, we had the first meeting of Performance, Risk and Budget Board. I just wanted to get those around the right way, which we are bringing together. We'll be meeting monthly to make sure that we are bringing the even further focus and attention to those areas of strategic risk, strategic performance and budget monitoring in a group that we can then go deep dive into some of those areas where we want to understand better, areas where we might be performing really well. We want to understand, learn from and improve and build on that improvement, but also those areas where we want to take a closer look in terms of performance. As well, we are working on a performance reporting and monitoring system, which will give us a more intuitive and integrated way of reporting and managing our performance. And so we are looking to put all of our performance risk data into one system and be able to report that alongside each other in a much more interactive and intuitive way.
Thank you very much, Sarah, and thank you, Liz. Do you want to add something?
I just wanted to add something that I understand we're also working with SWAP, Southwest Audit Partnership, because of course risk goes to the audit committee, but we also need to look at how that's reported here at executive, and so understand from Jason Vaughan that work has already started with SWAP, looking at how we work on risk and how we report to the executive. So there is a great deal of work going on, and it is really important work. I think we all need to understand that, because things are reported in different ways and different routes as they find different routes to budget setting at full council. It's really important that we pull all those strands of work together in a coherent form and understand how they work together. Thank you.
Okay, just looking around for comment from lead members. I'll go Fed, Dixie, Heather.
Thanks, Bill. I do like a good performance report because I love to dig into the detail, but I actually wanted to maybe ask a question on something more higher level, and I don't know whether it is for Duncan or Alan on this. It's around, I guess, the risk that we have as an organisation because of the transformation and the challenges that we face moving forward, because it's all well and good holding our performances to where it is at this moment in time, but we do know that we are going to cause lots of upheaval as we move forward, both through the budget decisions that we made on the 20th of February, but through the transformation programme that we're bringing in to be lean and efficient. Staff welfare is part of that and a huge important part of it, but I do feel, and I hope to be proved wrong, but that we may see dips in our services because we are going through that process. So it's how we look to either mitigate them or we accept that they're going to happen, and that actually as we move forward into Q1 or 2 of the next reporting period, that we need to say actually that's acceptable because of all that we're going through. But I would be interested in your views, or you can tell me that I'm, not quite on the point there.
I think there's a competition for the who goes first on that one. Alan.
Thank you, Chair. I'll give way to the Chief Executive in a second. So an excellent question through you, Chair. The key, there are a number of aspects to this. Firstly, we need to unpack and ensure that all of the impacts that were listed as part of the decisions that were taken in February are considered, and we are tracking the impacts associated with that. For example, we were tracking the number of complaints since vesting day associated with the Unitary Council. We had none, by the way, as part of that process. We did have clearly service level query as a result of that. But as part of that process, we'll be making sure that we understand the implications and tracking those through. So that will build into the decision reports. Staff welfare will be a key consideration. So part of developing a new set of indicators will be understanding the welfare of our staff and understanding how best to survey. And part of that is creating a new baseline. So undoubtedly that first survey will be very challenging reading, but it will give us that baseline and give us those areas of search as part of that. And I think the final piece for me is as we go through the transformation programme, and we know that there are options that will come forward that could potentially result in the cessation of services or the reduction in those services, being really clear what those impacts are with you as members, so you have all of that advice in front of you, so you're able to make that informed decision of that particular service change, reduction, cessation, adaptation will result in this impact, and are you comfortable with that given the budget implication or budget benefit associated with making that decision. And it's important as we move forward that we articulate that incredibly clearly as officers and provide that advice so you're making those informed decisions. So it's linked back to the performance report won't do it all, but it will certainly be an indicator of those particular challenges, and also monitoring things like customer services complaints are always a good ready reckoner.
Just to cover the wider point you made about will performance dip, I suspect it will in places. We're already seeing, particularly in terms of where we're under pressure for recruitment and retaining staff, particularly specialist staff, we have problems with service delivery already. You can see that in the report that we've been producing over the year. Where we have significant change in the service, we would hope that will be much more about saying what do we want to continue to achieve, and that we get the staff in place to be able to do that, so we can actually deliver on the things that we're collectively agreeing are important. There will be some points during the year where we are making changes in services where I think the performance will start to tell us what that change has made happen, and then we'll have to take a view about, are we happy with that level of performance? Do we need to do something different? We're not going to get all the changes right first time round. Some of it will be about implementing things and then making sure we amend it and tweak it to make sure it's as good as it can be within the resources available. That also then leaves a further question for members collectively at the end of the financial year next year. If we're not in a position where we're happy with performance, do we need to invest in some of those things? Because we may well cut too far, we may well find different things. So with a big whole-scale change like this, there is no way we can take this amount of money out of the organisation and still deliver everything at the same level. But I think we'll have to have much more clear conversations about what the important things that members want to be delivered at good quality, and maybe where are the things where we can step back a bit and agree that it will be slightly worse performance or significantly worse performance or no performance in a closure case. And yeah, that's okay because that's where we are financially.
Thank you. I've got Dixie, Heather and Joe from the executive. So Dixie.
Yeah, just quickly, I certainly endorse what Federica has said. I think we kind of have to accept that kind of change brings about difficulties. Mine's just a quick point that on page 112, number 8, it says possible key performance indicators that may be considered for future reporting are listed below, and for climate in place, it's considering carbon emissions indicators, and I'd really welcome this where it's pragmatic and meaningful. And I think we need to be careful about kind of producing data which is just about producing data, and it's not necessarily helpful. So I think there are places for this where it would be really good. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think as we both had a career in education, producing data when it's not actually helpful is something that we can feel strongly. Heather.
Thank you so much. And I just want to say I'm wholeheartedly a part of the nerdy club when it comes to performance monitoring. So I really quite enjoy it. But more importantly than the detail of the things in the appendix, I think is what Sarah was saying about how the movement forward, I think, towards combining risk and performance and tying that very closely into what we want as an organisation. I think that the point I just wanted to say was that I think one of the best things about performance monitoring like this can be the continuity, so you can see it over time. But I think the point's been made already that we're not going to have continuity. We're going to have an iterative process for a while where we work out what are the best KPIs or indicators to be looking at. And I definitely think that we've mentioned staff welfare and complaints as two really good indicators that any caring organisation, efficient organisation should be looking at. But I think it might be worth also thinking about cross-directorate KPIs, because at the moment everything is presented within the directorates they sit, almost all, not entirely, some have crept across. But I think that idea about tracking key processes perhaps, which would then go across different directorates. So just a thing to be, I'm sure you'd be thinking about that anyway, but I think that's, it isn't just what's that directorate doing, but how we're doing across, perhaps cross-border.
Okay. No, I was just thinking there wasn't a question there, wasn't it? That's yeah, good. And moving on to Joe.
Hello, thank you. I just wanting really to know more about the waste and recycling performance indicators, because this is so important to all our residents, and we've got a new service that's come in and there have been hiccups, but I think it's really important because we are asking our residents to do new things and change the way that their days and things for collection. So it would be nice to have that information as soon as possible, please.
If I could just come back that because of those changes, we haven't got some of that information at the moment. So it will come, Joe, and yes, we do need it. And I think any change to a system will cause a kind of a rise in complaints and a disruption to service, but hopefully it will settle as well. And sort of anecdotally, yes, I have been dealing with instances of miscollections, but actually, given the scale of the change across Somerset, I think it's gone remarkably well, actually. I don't know if you want to add anything, Mickey. No. Okay.
No. Thank you, Dixie.
Thank you, Joe. And moving to not seeing any other lead members or associate lead members, so moving on to other members. I've got Andy and then Mandy. All that rhymes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm following on from Councillor Smith-Roberts' question and the answers that the Chief Exec and Alan gave. We talked about kind of acceptable limits in drops in service, completely understandable drops given the context. My question is, will those limits be explicitly laid out? So, for example, customer service calls answered within 60 seconds at the moment sits at 97%, really strong score. Is there a number that will be published after which we consider that to be on an unacceptable level, and after which we'd consider rolling back changes or reevaluating what we do?
Just looking at the queue of officers that wish to answer that question. It's a really good one. And Duncan first.
I'll go first on that. Thank you. There isn't explicitly, because part of a question for us as part of transformation is what else can we do with productivity? It isn't just a case of take 50% away, lose 50% performance. So what we need to look at is how we do things, what technology we can use, how we set systems up. So what I think you'll see is that as we make the changes, the performance will hit the level it can sustain with the resources available. We then need to have the conversation about, are we collectively happy with that performance? Obviously, in the situation we're in financially, if the answer is no, we're not happy with that level of performance, that would require investing in the service to improve for us. You know, in most of the services we have now, we've never set the performance standard based on the investment we make. It was a performance standard that we achieve with the investment we make. So actually having that as a genuine conversation is probably a better place for the organisation. What it does mean, however, is if you did collectively as members choose to invest more than we already had, that would require cutting somewhere else. And that's unfortunately the game we're in now.
You happy? Yep. And Mandy, and I've got Sue online. Mandy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Just a couple of issues of concern for me. One's around the number of complaints which seem to be going up. And probably of more concern is that we're only just hovering above the 50% of those answered within 10 working days. The reason I raise it is the minute you start going outside of the expected response time, then those customers with complaints will start going everywhere else to try and get those complaints answered. I've had a number recently that have just not been responded to and not answered. And I think, you know, if we are a listening council, we should be listening to those complaints and responding accordingly. The other concern for me is those sort of respond first times are those the call centre calls that we are dealing with end to end. I know we've had an award-winning call centre. I know our staff are fantastic. I just find it concerning that those calls that have been dealt with end to end, the numbers are reducing. The reason for that is if they're not dealt with on that first call, again, they're going to be calling back in again, and you actually increase your workload. So for me, those two combined are two areas of concern for our residents in Somerset.
Yeah, I think we'd all share those concerns. I'm not sure whether there's a response that you were looking for necessarily.
Well, why? Okay, my question is why.
Would someone like to answer that now? But if you want to pick it up.
So I think just coming in, because the complaints sit within communities for us to report on. However, overall, it's not communities' complaints per se, it's the council's complaints. So it sits within all of directorates. I do think that we probably need to look at a wider paper or drilling down into the detail of what it is that's causing our residents to be unhappy. And are we fulfilling that within that first contact of answering it? Because that would always be our aim, wouldn't it? Just like you said with the calls, if you can look after a resident's queries within that first contact, you hopefully save work for everyone around. So I would recommend, and it's something maybe for Sarah and Alan to think about, is whether we can bring a paper on complaints and look at how we can learn from that, because you would hope that would maybe help us drive what does the transformation of our council look like, how is it that residents want to interact. When it comes to the phone calls, I do know that we have made some changes in relation to how residents interact with us. So I could use waste as an example. We have made our waste calls wait for longer, and that has driven the majority of our residents to use the online facilities, because we do need to make sure that those that can do use online facilities, so it frees up our advisors to then be able to help those that can't use the online facility, and that has been a positive effect. But I do think that paper is needed in relation to complaints, and I think that will help us as councillors understand what is it that residents expect from us.
Thank you, I'd welcome that.
Thank you. Liz, did you want to make a comment on that?
Yeah, if I may, please. I completely welcome the idea of a paper, and the complaints that are most difficult to deal with, of course, are the ones where people drop out during the process, and it's really hard to speak to them to find out why. But I just wanted to refer to page 130, where we say here complaints for Somerset Council have declined over the quarter from 1,057 to 889, with 53% being resolved within 10 working days. I do accept that under the key performance indicator, the number of ombudsman inquiries received in period, that is a number that has increased in Q3. But I don't think we're looking at a overall deteriorating picture, because if we were, how could we say that the number of complaints for Somerset Council has declined? So I don't know if that's something Fed or Chris could respond to. I hadn't read this paper, seeing it as something that caused me alarm at this stage. I do accept the challenges that are ahead of us. I do accept as well that those of us who are on the front line in any way know that since the lockdowns, it can sometimes be much more difficult to deal with people's lack of contentment about things that affect their lives, or even about society in general. And I think that it will be some years before we return to anything like we were before COVID, but who could predict that? I have no idea where we'll be going on that. But I do want to know, Chair, whether we are looking at a deteriorating picture here or not, according to what is written on page 130.
Ross, you indicated as well. Do you want to come in briefly?
I was just looking at this with a slightly different optic. I come from a commercial background where complaints are regarded as gold dust. They're really important and valuable for a council or organisation to actually understand not only customer satisfaction, but expectations, where we could improve. And I would welcome a paper on that handling of complaints. I do think we could actually step them up in terms of people's approach and attitude to complaints. They are really important things for us as a council to make the very best of. And I think that we need to learn some lessons from other sectors about how complaints are going to be handled in the future, because while they will, I no doubt, continue to reduce in terms of the issues, what will be the residual ones will be even more important to us in terms of how we handle them. So the paper is very welcome.
Okay, briefly, Heather, and then back to Mandy.
Incredibly brief. I think you're right. This is going to be the hardest thing to find out. If you absolutely endorse everything Ros just said about complaints. The other one is about the numbers of complaints going down. You like to think it's the right reason. You want it to be, but you don't want it to be because people think there's no point in complaining because nothing ever happens. And I'm not saying that's what's in these figures, but that's the worth of getting under the skin of the figures to understand what the reasons are. It's a bit, I with my kind of in this room with my police and crime hat on and the panel, it was always, oh, there's not many people reporting burglaries, but is there any point, and I'm not saying that's the case, but that's what a lot of people would say. So, and I'm not saying that's the case here, but that's the thing about you can have data, but you need the intelligence from the data.
Yeah, it's where crime surveys are really important, as well as looking at the reported data, isn't it? Sorry, Mandy, I was going to say I'll come back to you.
Thank you. I think generally our great British public don't complain a lot. I think a lot more could than do. I think they are a golden opportunity. They're that sort of listening that we can do as a council. And I think for me that 50, hovering just above 50% of doing it within the 10 days, that's absolutely key. And certainly when I was in the workplace, complaints were my first thing I did on a day. If I had anything in, it was given an absolute priority. And I think culturally, I would love to see that within the council.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the idea maybe of doing a sort of deep dive exercise in this is really powerful. I'm not sure whether governance would come on that, whether it would come to executive or whether it would go through audit or scrutiny or yeah. Do you want to just give your thoughts on Duncan?
If we took that through the performance, budget and risk group, and then we can feed it back as part of the next report to executive, and obviously scrutiny committee can pick it up as part of that process if they wish to.
Does that sound a way forward you'd be happy with, Mandy?
Thank you. I think it's for our residents to be happy, which is what we're all here for, isn't it? Thank you.
I'm always here to keep you happy, Mandy. You know that.
Perfect.
and Fed.
Wanted to come in on Liz's point. So we are seeing less, which is what the narrative is, but we are still not resolving more than half in the 10 working days. But also the most important thing to look at, and this is coming from my financial sector background, or one of the most important things to look at, because I work in insurance and dealt with complaints in that industry, is about actually how many are being upheld. Because if they're being upheld, that shows that we are doing something, or we didn't do something right, because you ultimately, that meant that they had a valid point to complain. So having that new area of saying how many are upheld there, at the third one down on page 15 of this section of the report, does show whether or not people are making valid complaints to us. So I think that's something also for us to understand, and we need that broken down in that complaints report by service, because then we can understand, where is it that things aren't quite going to plan or we're meeting residents' expectations.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, we got Sue Osborne online. Good morning, Sue.
Good morning, leader. It's just really picking up. I don't expect an answer right now because I'm aware that Sarah's only been the lead member for 2 weeks, and also the officers, that she hasn't got the officer support today. But it's really just a sort of comment, question on the performance report and the spike or rise in the number of overdue Care Act assessments, which is now running at 910. And I just wondered what impact that could have on ASC budgets going forward, particularly if we, as those assessments get done, we find ourselves perhaps identifying that needs have got more complex, therefore by implication more expensive. And what is being done to sort of try and bring that backlog down, so as we've got more of a handle on what's going on. Also as well, it's probably up to the scrutiny chair, but I would expect that performance monitoring reports do go to scrutiny committees as well. So we can possibly have a deep dive into those in a little more detail, and perhaps even look at whether the actual targets that are there are currently the right ones for where we are now and going forward. And finally, you referred to that the peer review is now actually ongoing. When is that peer review going to be published? And will it come before Adult and Health Scrutiny Committee, or indeed this executive? Is it going to be a public document? Thanks.
Yeah, my understanding is peer reviews are definitely a public document. So they started yesterday morning, and they're finished on Thursday, and I will get initial feedback. And I'm not certain of the timescales. Within a month is the guidance I've got from the chief executive. Certainly, there's no intention for that to be. It's the wonder of a peer review is effectively you're getting free advice, in return for which we give other people free advice, which is to me a pretty good deal. So yeah, there's no intention to keep any of that out of the public domain. Certainly there wouldn't be any point in doing that. So just on your earlier point on the performance indicators, Sarah's going to have a first stab, but I think we probably need to get back to you with a written answer.
Yeah, just wanted to say that I had actually also written down about the overdue Care Act assessments. I'm going to ask Mel about it. We will give a written reply about that. They have been going up. She's quite right, looking at the months. And I think it is a staffing issue, but it is something we need to get under control, and I'm certainly aware of that. So I will get back to her on that.
Yeah, and certainly it was, you know, it was an issue that I raised with the with peer review when I met them yesterday morning for their initial thing was that was an area where we felt that there was a concern. Also, you know, just on the other side of it, the unmet care packages has dropped right down as well. So there's some really good performance indicators in here in adults, as well as some that give us concern. So you know that point is well made. Okay, I think that's
sorry,
it.
Mark, just,
Oh, sorry.
sorry.
So, do you have another point?
Yeah, just very quickly, where in performance monitoring would say the closure of care homes can, because it's recently been announced that Somerset Care are closing 2 homes, one in Chard, one in Frome. That potentially is going to impact budgets again. But how does that show up in performance monitoring? Does that come into the category of handbags at all? Do we actually record that? Because that's going to have an impact, certainly in this coming quarter.
Okay. Yeah. In terms of those specific cases, I think there's ongoing dialogue with other providers about those 2 specific cases, and I don't want to get into detail because that's commercial conversation, as you'll appreciate. So, but we'll just pass on to the chief executive, who will answer much better than me.
No, you're bang on there, leader. So in terms of how it's monitoring performance, it's not, because it's obviously not our performance. So this is a private organisation making commercial decisions. The work we're now doing through the quality team placements is to make sure that we're keeping all of our clients safe effectively. So there are lots of ongoing conversations. It wouldn't count as a handback of care in that sense, because that's a particular definition around packages of care to do with individuals. But you may well see, depending on what the outcomes are of the conversations we're in with a number of providers now, that some other performance indicators are impacted by those closures, if that's what happens. But it's not part of our performance, so it's not in there at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. It was just a thought, you know, it's just a thought that there could be extra cost to us in terms of having to buy on the spot market.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see Councillor Wakefield writing furiously notes, and thank you for the question, because I think she is intending to take it up forthwith and with haste. And Francis.
Okay. 2 separate questions. One is about how we think about vacancies. I mean, the word vacancy comes up twice in our papers today, but where we're looking at things like a performance drop, or do we anywhere look in teams as to the level of vacancy within them? Because we know that can have a huge effect on performance. It's not appearing here in the way that any way that I can find, but maybe that's something that would be, and differentially across services rather than across services teams and so on. For example, is there a particular high vacancy rate in some of the adults teams at the moment? The other question is a different one, but does arise again from the adults one. We've just heard that our primary focus when a private or third sector, as this is, a care home closes, our primary function is to look after the needs of the residents that we fund. Do we have a wider concern about the residents who are self-funders? Because I would be very worried if we didn't.
Yeah, I think it's yeah, the concern is there, but it's not a performance indicator on our performance. It's yeah, no, absolutely. There's yeah, and indeed, as Councillor Wakefield has just said, and the staff as well, because we desperately need to make sure that any we have a shortage of care staff across the sector, and we need to signpost that as quickly as possible in those events. But as in the specific cases that have been been referred to, there are other providers already expressing interest. And watch this space, I think, is all we can say at the moment. Pass on to the chief exec.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, absolutely. We have wider responsibility to everyone and staff and the whole system, but obviously that doesn't all appear in our performance figures directly. In terms of the point you made about workforce reporting, yes, there's a huge amount of workforce data we look at as management, as well as a whole set of other management information on a regular basis. You'll see in some of the commentary, I'm not convinced it's in this quarter report, but sometimes it actually says because of vacancies, because of workforce issues, this has happened in performance. And, you know, when we talk about why the performance is where it is, that's quite often a factor. But there is all that workforce information if anyone ever wants to see it at the headline level. It's not performance information, it's management information we use to understand what's driving performance. Obviously, it may well turn into something which becomes a performance issue, at which point, you know, that will feature in the reports you see.
You certainly may.
Yes, maybe what we ought to have is something here which talks about what we're doing about it and the performance of what we're doing about it. For example, if we can't find care staff in a particular part of the county, are we thinking about how we do training there? Are we thinking about et cetera, and that might become a performance matter. And it's also a matter of transparency as to what's actually happening in the county.
Yeah, I think at that level it's possibly going into the service area rather than the performance area, as it's a response to the issue. You know, in the specific that you ask about, that would be looking at the Town Deal project and its subsidiary in my head, if I can use that phrase, as to how we're responding more strategically and through the Time to Care initiative and our overseas recruitment. So that is elsewhere in the strategic adults plan that we adopted last year. So I think it's covered elsewhere, but that cross-referencing might be of interest. I think you're right. I'm just aware that we're seeing some committee papers that go reaching 900 pages. I wouldn't want this to be the opus that it might end up with. But your point is well made, and it may just be a reference to where the mitigation is referenced. That would be good. Okay. Is that sufficient and reassuring?
I am aware that we have in certain areas of social work arranged training, not for carers but for social workers within Somerset, validated by organisations outside Somerset. I don't know whether that also applies to adults. It's the sort of performance of that kind of thing that might be a reasonable thing to look in terms of, you know, how successful is our work there.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'll be happy to speak to the chair of scrutiny if we want to go into that in any depth as well. Okay, yeah, Liz.
Just want to make a minor correction that the Academy for Social Care in Bridgewater is the Levelling Up project, not part of the Town Deal.
Oh,
just make sure we get that right in the minutes, please.
There are so many different sources of opportunities to get beauty parade funding from the government. I'm never sure which one had which title. So you're absolutely correct. That's a Levelling Up and not a Town Deal project. So thank you for the correction, and I'm sure the minute taker has highlight my error in red. Thank you. I've got no other indications to speak, so it remains for us to look at the recommendation where we're asked to endorse the Q3 performance management report and consider the appropriate actions and the content and level and detail of the report, which I think we've had some good feedback on. Proposed by Councillor Lyshawn, seconded by Councillor Shearer. Sorry, I'm just trying to work out which hand I saw. Well, I think there were two simultaneously. So it could have been Shearer or Wakefield. I think we'll go for Shearer on this occasion. All those in favour and all those against. So just remains me to thank Sarah and your team for everything that you've done in producing this report, and these are really useful reports. We do welcome them. I'm also just made a note to remind myself that I forgot to thank Nikki Hicks for the budget monitoring report on the last item. So our thanks for that one as well. And move on to item 9, which is the revisions to the term of reference for the Property and Investment Executive Subcommittee, and ask Councillor Ros Wyke to introduce.
I think it should actually on this occasion go directly to I think Dave Clark, as this is a constitutional thing, but this is a bit of housekeeping, given the appointment of Councillor Wakefield, among other things, to the cabinet.
Okay, thank you for that guidance. That's not what my chair schedule is. And Mr. Clark looks slightly surprised, but I'm sure we're going to see a virtuoso impromptu performance.
I'm happy to take it if you like, but technically it's not my paper.
No, that's fine, absolutely, Chair, no problem at all. This is just really an administrative change to the role and remit of the subcommittee, just the way in the initial terms of reference that were originally penned and written, they had responsibility for the whole gambit of the investment portfolio that we had. It became quite clear quite early on that there's a whole raft of decision making that that goes on around this portfolio in terms of lease reviews, rent reviews, that really quite minor level that applies to existing delegations that officers already have to deal with that, often in consultation with the lead member. So really that's the main focus of the amendment to the terms of reference, is to ensure that the subcommittee is only looking at those significant areas of business, rather than getting into the minutiae of the day-to-day operations of the portfolio, and just to ensure that that's taken forward. I don't know if Ollie as lead officer wants to add anything to that.
Yeah, just to note the other changes and the inclusion of Councillor Wakefield as a full member of that committee. We've already been benefiting from Councillor Wakefield's expertise as an associate member, but very pleased to be working with her as a full member now.
Okay, thank you. Just to highlight for the eagle-eyed amongst you that on page 147 of the report, in the recommendation, there are some words missing, which is we would add after the word property and investment subcommittee, terms of reference, TOR. So if anybody who's eagle-eyed and spotted that those words have been omitted, I would like to propose a drafting amendment. And do I have to do that as a formal amendment, or are we just accepting? We're happy to accept that as an addition, so that those few words have been missed off the papers. Not seeing any other contributions from lead members or associate lead members, so we'll come to other members in the room, and Councillor Chilcott has indicated. Mandy.
Firstly, my congratulations to the chairing of the last meeting that we had of this committee. It was interesting. I think what's interesting to me to note, though, is when there are such issues as they were here online, it's nearly impossible online to tell what's going on. So I think there can be work done on that for any future similar situations, which we hope there won't be. My question actually is around, I've had a look at this and I've had a look at the Constitution as well. And my question was around transparency and access. Now, when we started to hybrid work, I think there was a lot of work done on hybrid meetings, and it was very much seen that as a councillor, your access to a hybrid meeting should be equal whether you're in the room or outside of the room, i.e. you can ask questions, etc. Now, these meetings, for some reason, when there are confidential items, no one else can get access. You have to be in the room. Now, my question is, I'm wondering why this committee is treated different to every other that we have. And following on from that, I can't actually see any guidance either here in what we've got today or in the Constitution around those sort of hybrid meetings and who has access and when they have access. So that was my question related to this paper. I went looking for it and couldn't find it. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Mandy. And yes, it was a very professional handling of it by the standing chair, and I was delighted to be on a course up in the University of Warwick and therefore not in the chair at the time. And we were aware that there are ongoing issues around that may affect a number of our council meetings in the future. And we have asked the governance team just to advise on the handling of those situations, and we are aware that we on more than one occasion made it a plan B as to make sure that we can transact our business in the context of people expressing their right to protest, which is also important that people feel heard. Someone used the phrase listening council, which I have used in the past, and while we encourage them to use the channels that we have available, and we are in conversation with some of those individuals outside of sort of meetings, there is that right to protest, which does exist, and we need to be mindful of that. On the substantive point, I'm just looking to the monitoring officer to guide us on the use of hybrid.
Yeah, no problem. So in terms of the legislative basis for meetings, there is no requirement for meetings to be hybrid. So we're not contravening or undermining any kind of legislative basis. As you know, a lot of the legislation is based from 1972, so it is admittedly a little bit archaic and was written at a time before we had hybrid meetings or Teams calls to facilitate that. The reason for dealing with this executive subcommittee slightly differently than we do to the rest of our committees, or the general practice with the rest of our committees, is just fundamentally due to the nature of the business that's being discussed and business that's potentially being transacted. It's very often dealing with sensitive commercial information which has significant implications as to the income and potential financial well-being of the authority. By doing meetings in a hybrid format, we lose an element of control of that information, even with the best of intentions. We don't know where members are attending the meeting, if they're attending it virtually. We don't know what environment they're in. We don't know who else is in the room. So that is the fundamental reason why we've taken the decision to try and retain an additional blanket of control over the information that's being discussed and the information that's being shared. Members do have a right to access that information, but on this occasion, for the reasons I've outlined, we've taken the decision that access should be physical only.
Mandy, do you want to come back? I'm happy to.
Yeah, I think there's several elements within that. Over the years, we've had a number of confidential papers with sensitive information in that we have allowed access to in meetings. I've never known it to be a problem. And for me, you know, every councillor knows if you get a pink paper or confidential, it is confidential. And that has to be in your dealings, whether it's home in the office or away. And the final thing is we are a council that's trying to cut down on our emissions. And I don't want to have to travel to an office when I can perfectly well listen in online. I've done it for years. I've done it with sensitive papers. I've done it with pink papers on numerous other meetings. And I don't get why that level of trust and competency of councillors is, I suppose, doubted for this meeting when it's not for others. Either you take all pink papers and say only in the meeting, or you do some. I think there's an inconsistency there, Chair, and I hope you don't mind me raising it, but I did listen and would have liked to have heard that meeting but couldn't get here.
Yeah, your point about that consistency, I think, has been addressed. I'm happy to have further conversations with you offline if that would help your understanding.
I'd really help that, and,
yeah,
and we do want to keep our mileage down whenever we can, because there's an expense to the authority as well by bringing people in.
Fully appreciate that, but there, you know, as was illustrated at the last meeting, there are particular sensitivities around some of our commercial investments that perhaps doesn't apply elsewhere in our decision making. But very happy to have that conversation offline if that would help.
Thank you. I will keep pushing, Chair.
Right. Am I seeing any other comments from members? Generally, no, I'm not. So we return to the proposal with the drafting amendment to agree to the revision to the terms of reference for the Property and Investments Executive Subcommittee and set out in Appendix A, and revisions to the Property and Investments Subcommittee terms of reference. I've got a proposer from Councillor White, seconded by Councillor Wilkins. All of those in favour, all those against. Was that vote in favour, Councillor Dance? Was just, oh yeah, no, just slightly late there. I think we just need to work on those reaction times. So that's clearly carried. And thank you for the paper and your contribution, Ollie, as well. We've got move on to item 10, which is a review of our street cleaning and ground care operations. Please note that the main report on this item is not confidential, but the supporting appendices that are helpfully in pink in the paper copies. I'm not sure what they look like online. I've not looked at the online copies, but if you can colour your screens in pink, that will help. If you do need to refer to the pink pages, then could you indicate, and then we will have to pass a resolution to remove members of press and public from the room and from online. So if you could indicate that either now or at the appropriate time, we will pass the appropriate resolutions. And so we've got Councillor Federica Smith-Roberts to introduce, and it then says introduce, to hand over to Sarah, and I see Sarah at the back of the room. And we got John O here, so it's actually John O that you'll be passing on to. Okay, that's brilliant. So Fed to introduce it, and then John O.
Thank you, Bill. So this report is looking at the review of outsourced ground maintenance and street cleansing services. Just as per the report that is in page 157 of our online papers, this is in particular in relation to the former West and Mendip contracts, and there are 3 contracts that are in play there because of the way that the previous Taunton Deane and West Somerset were brought together. So it's just where possible, if people have got questions, I guess we stick to those kind of areas of what our street cleansing is, rather than where we currently do have our in-house services already. There are different dates in play, which make it more complicated, but I think bringing this paper forward, it's one of the benefits of us being a unitary council, and one of the first services, I guess, within communities where we are showing that we're pulling different areas together and working out that the different contracts that we have and what best suits those communities as a whole. So you will see, and I've got Jono here to answer any of the intricate questions, that where possible, we will be looking to devolve services. Because we feel that that's what the communities need in those areas, but we do know that we have statutory responsibility when it comes to certain aspects such as street cleansing, that we need to make sure that we hold responsibility there, and if there isn't devolvement, then we need to hold them within us here at Somerset Council. There is a note here that you'll see at point 2 in the background papers that in relation to in particular the West, there is an automatic 3-year extension clause that is in play, and that it's likely that that is to be triggered for that to extend. But I'll pass over to Jono if you've got anything that you want to add to my little introduction there.
Thank you. Yeah, only a couple of things just for clarity. So ground care is maintenance of parks and open spaces, tree management and play areas. And street cleansing is street sweeping, litter picking, emptying of bins on council land, toilet cleaning and collection of fly tips. With regards to the contract end dates, the end date for the former Mendip area is the 31st of May 2025. And as Federica said, the Somerset West area is a coming together of 2 contracts. So that was Taunton Deane Borough Council and West Somerset District Council. So there are 2 end dates. So it's November the 30th, 2024 for the West Somerset area and January 31st, 2025 for Taunton, notwithstanding the 3-year trigger in that area that Federica mentioned. So just to be clear, that 3-year trigger only applies to the former Somerset West and Taunton area. So the initial focus at the moment is on Mendip. Just a note really, whilst 100% insourcing, we believe will generate savings to the council, greater savings will be achieved by devolution. And all 5 town councils in the former Mendip area have expressed interest in devolution of services contained within the contract at its expiration. And we, as officers, are now engaged with each of those town councils about the opportunities. Federica also mentioned some of those areas that we would likely need to insource. So that is most likely to be around street sweeping. So Somerset Council is the accountable authority for that element of work. Service devolution will deliver the biggest savings portion, but it is important to note that what we do insource, we believe, will be done at a saving for the authority. Thank you.
Okay, are there any comments or questions from members of the executive? So Ros White first.
Thank you. I appreciate you're having conversations with the 5 towns of Mendip. I'm aware that on the list there are quite a few communities with relatively small amounts of grass cutting, etc. I think it would be helpful ahead of 2025 to actually spell out exactly what's done in each of the villages, because I know many of them would like to know exactly what the service is being delivered, because many of them, I think, would like to have the reduction in grass cutting sooner rather than later on the grounds of rewilding.
Yeah, absolutely. We will engage with those individual parishes as well.
Not seeing anyone on the executive, so I think I saw Mandy.
Yes, you did. Thank you. Done a lot in the past on street cleansing, etc. I know when the contract was looked at for West Somerset, councillors were very involved and actually helped shape that contract. And actually there was a lot of time spent on, were you doing too much in some areas too often? And actually when the work was done with the towns and parishes, a lot was taken off the contract because there were some things we were doing that perhaps didn't need doing. So there was work to be done. So my questions, there are several. Firstly, at full council, I think the saving for this area was from bringing it in-house. There wasn't any mention in the council papers about devolving, and certainly I wasn't aware of this as a West Somerset councillor. This is the first I've heard, and we have another West Somerset councillor here I don't think knows anything about it either. So that's the first thing. Please, please, please come and talk to us. Secondly, I'm sort of not totally clear. There is an element of street cleansing that is statutory, and I know that statutory is a grey area as to what level is statutory and what is not. And I, at the time, looked at a lot of pictures at how much rubbish there was on the road and how much there wasn't. And there are several levels, so I understand all of that. So the first thing is, you know, is there still a statutory requirement, and at what level will that be delivered in West Somerset, and will that be at the same level to the other areas of Somerset? The second question is, you know, what are you looking to devolve, cost shunt, whichever way you like to describe it, to the towns and parishes? I wasn't clear from the paper what the ask was. And the third thing is timing. You know, the towns and parishes have just set their budgets, so they're not going to look at that again till after the November date is passed. So it's how that will be dealt with. And the final thing is, if you are asking to devolve, a lot of our areas, and I'll take Minehead because I live there, Minehead and Oldcombe are one area. Oldcombe, parts of it falls within another parish, a small Dunster parish. Minehead, much larger precept. In Minehead, you know, are you going to get to the point where the street sweepers turn around between the two parishes and come back, because one area has been able to afford to pay some more and some hasn't? So I just have this concern about equality of service around Somerset. So understanding and reassurance would be helpful, and I think had we had a conversation, most of those questions probably could have been answered before today.
Yeah, thank you. I'll take those one at a time. So yes, the original saving that came forward, it was around insourcing everything. The reason for that was because when we started this work back in spring, and it was before the financial emergency. So we were looking at insourcing. Devolution was was always on our minds, but it wasn't such a kind of big ticket thing as it is now. So that's where those emerging conversations are happening around devolution. It started out as an insourcing project, but obviously now there is a devolution angle to it. The West Somerset area, yeah, all of those things I absolutely understand and agree with. I suppose with the West Somerset area, there is that trigger that I think is likely to be to come forward. So we have time in West Somerset to work on all of these things. I think street cleansing on the statutory side of it, yeah, it is a grey area. So street cleansing, that we are the accountable authority, but our accountability is the safety and the cleanliness, I suppose, is what I'm saying. So that can be done at in various different ways to various different levels. It's not black and white. So we will need to define our own service standards across Somerset that are consistent if we insource that element. Timing wise, we have started early conversations with Mendip so that we can align everything. We've got 14 months to do that on the Mendip side. We have longer on the West Somerset side because of that trigger. So I think hopefully that answers your question. The quality of service bit, yeah, that comes back to defining those consistent service levels. But as a unitary authority, we have the ability to do that now. We have the ability to do it across Somerset rather than in different districts.
Just to respond, our financial emergency well predated our budget that we only voted on 2 or 3 weeks ago. So, you know, to be bringing in now post the budget to not allow sort of towns and parishes again that time is I'm sure a huge frustration. We did it with other areas of the budget. We actually went ahead of a lot of the work, but with this it feels the other way around, and I think that will be a concern for the towns and parishes.
Just looking for who's going to win the race between Chris and Fed. Yeah, so Chris first and Fed.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we understand the ask of members today. So the ask today is to approve the insourcing of this service on the natural completion of the contract. You're not being asked to devolve anything. There is a cost saving that was put forward for budget setting as part of that natural insourcing at the end of the contract. We are also in conversations with towns and parishes around potential devolution. Some have come forward and said, we would like to take control of litter picking. We want to empty the bins locally. We want to cut our own grass in certain areas. So we're having prioritised conversations with those who are coming forward now saying, we want to be involved. And what we're trying to do in this report is identify that we will take account of that as we progress towards contract end dates. But where there are towns and parishes that don't want to be involved, or there is a statutory and collective minimum, so running and operating a large-scale road sweeper isn't going to be something that gets devolved, that will then fall back to Somerset Council. And there is no assumed reduction in service standards. So the saving that was put forward was around the operating model, not a reduction in standard. So I just want to be absolutely clear in terms of today's decision. It's about delivery, not delivery standard. And then we tend to use in these contracts the code of practice on litter and detritus as the standard. So there's a published document through DEFRA as was, and that sets out those expected standards.
Okay, and Fed, do you want to?
I just wanted to maybe in very simple terms, and I think this will then check everyone's understanding when it comes to the West Somerset contract. If we take what was the ex-West Somerset District Council, that is due to end on the 30th of November this year, but it can be triggered, and we think it's likely to be triggered, that will extend for another 3 years. So then there will be conversations to be had during that time, and then as to what it looks like in that area, because it could then come back into be insourcing. So I do, however, think, Mandy, you have a point in relation to perhaps how we then communicate this to councillors, particularly in the Mendip area, because they are the ones that will go first, and then will be the learning point as to how we then roll through our councillor interaction alongside our parishes as to what this means in street cleansing. Because I think we all know that our inboxes as councillors, people care about rubbish bins, dog poo, grass cutting and potholes. And the majority of what I said here is covered within this paper. So it's just around how we deal with that and make sure that members are informed. But for the West, unless Donna corrects me, it will end later on this year, but we think it will be triggered so it doesn't officially end.
Thank you for that. And I didn't get that sense of that within the paper and reading it. So my last question is, will you let us know at some point whether it's going to be triggered or not? Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
That was like anticipation was the answer going to be yes or no, though, wasn't it?
The contract, the trigger is, there's not an automatic right to the trigger, but it's got to be based on acceptable performance. So we're doing that due diligence at the moment, but obviously across a 7-8 year contract, it's got to be quite significantly, consistently poor performance for that not to be triggered.
Thank you. And I would say we have really good service locally. A few things we could probably talk about, but generally a really good service.
That's interesting to hear. And your point around boundary lines is I think is applicable in various areas of the county as we look towards that devolution piece. I think community governance reviews which are an interesting process, as we found out with Taunton, do need to happen, but we also need to recognise that they're not simple. People do care about lines on maps much more than perhaps we might think. But certainly, yeah, if you walk down Tudor Way in Bridgewater, you have to be a real geek to know which parts are in Bridgewater, which are in Lord Petherton. Sarah, did you want to just come in?
I just wanted to say, sorry, I was out of the room for the beginning of this, but I can see the point in actually making it all one thing. Looking at the way it's worked now, some is inside, some is outsourced. And I do remember when we were at Somerset Western Taunton with the ID Verdi street cleansing contract, one of the problems was it hadn't been being managed very well. And when you've got an outsourced company working, you need to manage them to make sure they do what they're supposed to do. And when they were asked to do things, they said, we've never been asked to do that before. Well, no, because you weren't doing it, but you should have been. It was in the contract. So I think the idea of bringing it in-house where we can manage it within, and I think that's a good thing. I think it should work better, actually, because, it's a third party thing. You're trying to keep an eye on somebody else who's doing something for you, whereas we can do that better in-house. So I'm all in favour of this.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. I've got Francis and Andy, I believe. So I can't remember who was first. And Andy has been the perfect gentleman, so it'll be Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Very much welcome what's been said for the last few speakers, that there is now clarity. At some point between now and November, it will be apparent whether the trigger for West Somerset will happen and before January for the Taunton Deane area. And if it is triggered, there will be just confirmation that there will be no opportunity for insourcing until 3 years after those dates, and therefore no opportunity for devolving until after those dates. That's just clarity on that. Is that correct?
Yeah, broadly.
Lovely. That's great. Now the real question is, I was at a meeting in this room some time ago where some people in, I think, the Mendip area were talking about performance, and it was suggested by officers that actually parish and town councils ought to be feeding back if they were not happy with what's been going on. Now, I have two different parishes with experiences in West Somerset, one of whom are very keen to support. First of all, they were very keen on devolution. Pity they didn't understand it wasn't happening, but never mind. But what they are very keen to do is to know what is supposed to happen at the moment under the contract in their parish. They're not asking for any financial information or anything like that. They merely want to know what is supposed to happen so that they, as they go about their daily lives, can see whether or not it is happening. And they have been repeatedly refused this information. Can we now sort that out?
Yeah, I mean, we talked about this previously at scrutiny, and it's a piece of work we're doing. So in terms of amount of times that the sweepers go round and things like that, that's no secret. So yeah, we're working on pulling all of that together.
When may they be, will they understand whether they can know that the information?
We're aiming to try and get that out by spring.
By when?
Spring.
Spring?
Oh, sorry, it's spring, isn't it? Meteorologically, it's spring. Yeah. But
I think late spring.
Let's yeah, we're aiming to get that out by the end of spring. Yeah.
By the end of spring.
So let's say June. June is fine.
Right, okay, thank you.
And Andy.
Thank you very much, Chair. Two questions. The second question hinges on the answer of the first. When we talk about devolution, I just want to be clear in my mind. Are we talking about fully devolved services, or are we talking about in-housing the service and spreading the cost like we've done with CCTV, for example?
So I think a preference obviously is a fully devolved service, but in practice and this is just a wider comment, invested in more than others. So what's coming through very strongly is an interest in open spaces, play areas, toilets. That's what I think will be the devolved services. Some elements of street cleansing, perhaps bin collections, litter picking, but I think the street sweeping element will remain with us, and we will insource that, but at a saving to the authority.
Cool. So the second question that does follow on from that then is, once these services are devolved out, will we as Somerset Council, the overarching authority, be able to see the total amount spent on all of these services, including the amount spent by the devolved councils, so that we can have a view on the impact, the total impact on the public purse, rather than talking about cost savings, which is actually, it's a saving for our council as far as our balance sheet goes, but not necessarily for the residents paying the rates.
I think Fed's going to pick that one up.
No, we wouldn't be able to, because it's down to those individual councils to procure their own operational proceedings, and this has always been one of the concerns around some of that, and the fact that you may not get the economies of scale that a unitary authority could give you in the fact that, you know, Taunton Town Council, I sit on that, so I'll say I'll wear that hat there, may procure its own operations. You probably could go and do the own research through their accounts, because they have to publish them very differently to how we do, where all the lines are showing, but that would be a mammoth piece of work for someone, wouldn't it? But that would be my view. I don't know if Theo wants to correct me on that, but I don't think that you can see the complete level for every council.
Yeah, go on, corrector.
I'm not going to correct you. No, I'm going to back up. As a loyal colleague, I'll back up what she said. You know, we've got to realise that the way city, town and parish councils work, some of them are looking after pieces of ground and assets that they've been looking after for decades, if not centuries. My council dates back to the 13th century. Some of them have taken stuff on just this year. Some will continue to take on more things. The money that they spend could be on, you know, cutting bits of grass they've just taken over, cutting bits of grass that they inherited 50 years ago. There would be no way of actually taking, even if we had the budgets of all the councils, and we'd have to ask them all for them, there's no way of taking all of that information and dividing up exactly what it's spent on in that way. So I just don't think that's going to be possible. But of course, it will be for residents in those communities to look at what their own city, town and parish council is doing and judging whether they think that they are getting value for money in their city, town or parish.
Thank you. Yeah, just to add to that, yeah, there's been devolution isn't new. We in North Petherton, we bought our playing field and started cutting the grass some time ago, and other councils may well be starting that process now, or they may have been cutting it in 1380 in the City of Wells. The other point I would strongly make is it's been an interesting experience bringing together the finances of 5 previous councils, 4 district councils that have accounted for things in very, very different ways. Can you imagine what that looks like across 278 city, town and parish councils? And while I appreciate that the information you're seeking may be of interest, I'm not sure that it necessarily adds to the quality of services that we have in Somerset. So so I appreciate why you're looking for it, but I also think there comes a point at which getting that information doesn't actually change anything in reality. But by all means, follow. Come
Yeah,
back to me.
no, I absolutely appreciate that, and the nuances of the, you know, all that's been discussed make complete sense. I'm very conscious that devolution, whilst not new, we do also have a responsibility to make sure that as a county we're providing services to the best value, to the money that we bring in. And if it becomes obvious that devolution doesn't provide that best value, then I suppose that's a question that we need to ask.
Yeah, and I think that's possibly a piece of scrutiny work that could be undertaken that would be of interest. And I think you'd possibly look at case studies rather than trying to get the whole picture, because I think trying to get that whole picture would occupy a number of people for a number of hours, and with very little understanding being gained. But the point is well made about it being the public purse, and you know, although we do have to respect that position that each city, town and parish council are their own sovereign body. It is up to them whether they want to have that conversation about devolution and how they want to have it. And this is not going to be, one model doesn't fix all. What works for Frome or Bridgewater or Taunton does not work for some of our smaller parishes. I won't start naming them because it will then get embarrassing. So yeah, you appreciate the point that I'm making. I think your point is well made, and I think there are other ways of getting the answers that you're looking for. Yeah. Okay. Are we seeing any other members wanting to contribute? So we have a proposal in front of us. The executive is recommended to explore and agree devolution of services to town and parish councils at expressions of expiration of contracts, to insource remaining services under the contract that aren't devolved to town and parish councils at the point of contract expiration. And then there are the two standard C and D clauses that we didn't need because we didn't go into the contract. So can I see a proposer and a seconder? Please can I see it? Oh, there's a seconder. Councillor Wakefield. All those in favour? All those against? That's clearly carried. Now my schedule says we are to take a break between 12:20 and 12:30. Do we wish to have a 10-minute break at 12:43, or shall we power through?
Chair, if I may say, Councillor Shearer and I need to go to the adult social care peer review in County Hall at 1:30. We would appreciate if we could either continue or be excused from the final item.
Okay, I think there is a consensus on power through. So there's just two more items on the agenda, but if members can be, where appropriate, concise, I think it will assist some members' comfort, if I can put it as delicately as that. The appointment of contractors for the development of phase B and C1 of the North Taunton Woolway project. The previous comments about if any members wish to comment on the pink or confidential papers, then please could you give notice of that so we can go into private session. Otherwise we can maintain being in public. I just realised I forgot to thank Jono. Could we pass on thanks to Jono? I just realised he'd left the room. My apologies. So Fed, for you to introduce the item.
Thank you, Bill. I'm really pleased to introduce this item. We heard earlier on today from Trudy in relation to just the importance of good quality housing for our residents. And so for us to have this paper on the agenda where we are taking the next stage of our journey in relation to the North Taunton Woolway project, which is providing over 230 homes to a high quality, but also to an energy efficient standard with the lifelong living suitability there. For me, it's just such a positive that we are doing. The decision today is appointment of a contractor for phase B and C1, which is approximately over 50 properties as part of the project. And that project has been ongoing since 2020, when we originally made a decision at Somerset Western Taunton for the full business case, and it fits within our HRA business plan that went through full council only 2 or so weeks ago. For me, executive and probably all council members have heard me regularly talk about the North Taunton Woolway project and just how life-changing it is. We've visited Bill and we've done the opening. We've seen just how as a social landlord we can take or build properties that are just brilliant and truly life-changing, and which is what we want as a council, to be able to work together so that we look to perhaps support some of the challenges of demands that adult services face. I present this report, and I've also just got some good news for everyone, is that the Phase A of North Taunton Woolway has been nominated or shortlisted for the South West Residential Property Awards in relation to affordable housing. So it's really positive that that's been taken note of. But I have got Jane here who will answer any particular questions in relation to us signing off on appointing a contractor for the next phase.
Thank you. Jane, do you want to add any comments to what Fred has said? Or we have to say questions?
I have just read. Sorry again. I just wanted to confirm and enhance to members on this that going forward, we wanted to ensure the social value aspects which we achieved on Phase A continues going forward with the new contractors. So on the social value template, all the achievements we've made on Phase A were made mandatory for the main contractor going forward. So we will at the least achieve the same, but anticipated that we will receive more. So it is not just about the building, but all the social aspects and the regeneration going forward.
Thank you. Am I seeing any comments from leader associate members? No. Anything from other members? Anything online? So that's a nice, concise one. It's really good to have it's lovely to have a good news story in this. I certainly, from having been and visited the site, I was very impressed by the quality, and I think it sets as an example. Really pleased to hear we've been put forward for an award for that. I think it would be great to shine a spotlight on this piece of work. So I'm assuming you're happy to propose, Fed. Councillor Wilkins is happy to second. Just move to the recommendations that the executive is recommended to approve the outcome of the procurement process and award a contract to the lead bidder named in tender Appendix B. And the other two are the recommendations that haven't been needed because of no reference to the commercially sensitive information. So can I see lead members in favour, please? Lead members against? That's clearly carried. So we move on to item 12. Which is an executive decision in relation to Somerset Council's role as the host authority and accountable body to the Somerset Rivers Authority Partnership. Please remember that if we go into the confidential papers, we then have to pass a resolution and throw the hordes of public and press out of the room. So please give me notice if you intend to do that. And Dixie, you're introducing, I believe.
Thank you, Leader. Before I introduce this, I'd just like to say that acknowledge it has been a pretty bad winter for floods, and there has been a multi-agency response in which we've been involved, but I don't think any of that detracts from the distress to some households who have been flooded repeatedly. So I think it kind of highlights the need for the continuation of the Somerset Rivers Authority, which is all about flooding. And on an annual basis, Somerset Council needs to agree to be the host authority and the accountable body for the Somerset Rivers Authority. So this is what this is about. And also reviewing the revised MOU. There are not many changes of the MOU, but there are a few which I think in the document are kind of highlighted in blue, and some of those are around the kind of the revised strategy and action plan, which was done kind of after 10 years. And I think this will be hopefully agreed on Friday, on the 8th of March, at the board of the Somerset Rivers Authority. and it will come into effect from the 1st of April 2025. So if I hand over to David and or Kirsty. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Councillor Dart. Just to add one very brief comment to what was already covered in the introduction is, I think whilst this decision is very much process and governance and good governance and following the right steps because the council is our host authority, I think just to follow on from as Dixie was saying, this is very much about enabling. It's about enabling through the money that the SRA can raise about extra works across the county to reduce the risks and impacts of flooding, and those are delivered through the partnership, through our partners. So it really is about achieving a lot more than the sum of the parts. So I just wanted to emphasise that because it's quite a dry paper about decision making and things, but to kind of emphasise that's the end point of it.
Right, thank you very much. I'm very aware we've got the chair of the Somerset Rivers Authority in the room, so we need to be on our best behaviour for this item. Any comments from members, lead members or associate lead members of FED?
I really welcome this, Chair, coming forward and support all the work that the SRA is doing. I think for me, though, it's a wider political piece, and I think I've asked this before in public around, you know, the SRA was set up, if I've got my history correct, out of the devastating floods that we saw a decade ago. We had government say that money was no object to us, and that there was around the fact that then I was expecting a national picture to be changed in relation to support for the work that this happens. And then we saw a bill that went through, I think, as far as the Lords and then got stopped. Are we seeing any mood music from central government in relation to making those changes to look to support so that this is the right thing to do for us here in Somerset at the moment with this? We need this in our toolkit in order to support people and to tackle all the different projects that the SRA is doing. But I guess it's for me about what is national government doing to look to support this wider picture. And that might be more of a political question for Dixie or Mike to answer, but it would be interesting to know, is there any music coming out of central government?
I'm expecting a one-word answer, to be fair.
So no, there isn't any mood music about, obviously when the SRA was set up, there was a plan to have this sort of model across the country. There was a plan to obviously give that sort of governance and its own kind of legislation to support that. That hasn't happened, and it has been indicated to us it is highly unlikely to happen as well.
Yeah, that's also been my understanding with this, which is unfortunate, but yeah, when we start a new parliamentary term, maybe that legislative time can be found. Richard.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because obviously there was a lot of noise in 2014 over the flooding, but we have had a very severe winter this year, and the effect has been in different areas, I believe, on the whole. But I wonder if the numbers of people affected, is that comparable at all, or is there a difference?
So we've seen more households flooded over this last year than we did in sort of the 2013-14 floods. I think the difference is it's been more sporadic, more across different communities that previously haven't received or been part of the impacts of flooding. What we have seen is the east of the county much more impacted, and you know, we've had areas in the last month that have been flooded twice, so it's much more severe as well.
I think I could just add to that, Kirsty. Thank you. And I think that just to join up the dots in the paper, that issue is reflected in the draft strategy that we've circulated. It really recognises that issue of the changing impacts of climate change, the fact that we're likely to get more of those types of events, and we're wanting to look at things in a much more catchment-based approach right across the county to get more holistic responses.
Yeah, and very, very aware that the data isn't a complete data set, because not every flooding incident gets reported in, but also that the metrics are also not just the number of properties impacted, the length of time that they're underwater and the length of time until they're habitable again. All of those things are important metrics in looking at the impacts of flooding on our communities. It's a topic that many of us could have many interests in. I'm sure I saw a hand on my left. Not from a lead member, associate lead member, so I'll go to Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This ties the SRA into unitarisation. There are both parishes and groups of parishes and voluntary groups which have come together working with water authorities, the council, the SRA, and so on. In the past, they were able to have a route into the SRA through the district councils. And a route towards applications for funding, which might or might not be granted. That that route has gone because those councils don't exist. Certainly the West Somerset Flood Group feels that it has no way in to have any effect or input, and it has been an enormously important a part of the scene of dealing with the different not the levels type flooding that we have, but the other sorts of flooding that the SRA deals with of stuff that comes down rather hard and stuff that comes up from the sea in hilly areas and coastal areas. What's happened about that? Because this feels like a real lack at the moment.
Yes, thanks. And I think we all saw the scenes in Withycombe earlier in the year, and we were like, wow, that is certainly not something that I think anybody had seen in living memory, and that might be reflected in a number of causes, both environmental and agricultural, might I say. David Kersey, do we have a response?
Yeah, just on that point, we have 2 community engagement officers funded by the Somerset Rivers Authority who are always willing to go and speak to community groups, flood groups. So if those contacts haven't already been made with the West Somerset group, I'll make sure that happens. But on the broader point, the very similar point you've made there was made quite forcefully by Councillor White, who sits on the SRA board, about what is the process for making sure ideas, issues are fed into the Somerset Rivers Authority. So recognising new strategy, new catchment approach, the development of a new action plan, we will very much need to kind of build in what is the process for making sure either community groups, parish councils and others can feed in their ideas to us. So I don't have the precise answer for you now, but we're conscious that we need to make that clearer and make it more easier for people to access us.
Might briefly come back. It wasn't so much about feeding in ideas, though absolutely if they're not properly tied up with the engagement officer, that would be really helpful. It was about actually applying for cash, for money, for schemes. And that was a route that was there, and it appears to have gone.
What I should have added there is the SRA board did take a decision earlier in the year to open up the grant giving process to the likes of parish councils, town councils, and that's another piece of work. We'll be getting the steps in place between now and requesting grant proposals around about August, September time, so that parish and town councils can bid direct for funding, which they can't currently do. So.
Be really helpful to let them know that, because at the moment they're feeling it's gone and nothing's coming in its place. And clearly there is something planned, but not yet. But it'd be good to let everybody know.
Yeah, I think the comms points well known, and thank you for that reassurance, David. That's on the way, and we look forward to having it. I can see the chair of the SRA nodding away next to you, so I'm sure you can get the accountability there as well. Indeed, absolutely. Councillor White.
Thank you. And thank you for the recognition that flooding has moved beyond the original traditional levels of moors. I'm interested to know, do we have enough resource as a council to do the statutory section 19 investigation of each and every flooding instance? I know I've got, I think, 7 communities in my patch alone and others which have had partial flooding. And I just wondered, do we have enough resource?
So we have seconded some additional resource from one of our other teams across to the LLFA, who are responsible for carrying out the Section 19 reports. I think I'd always say more resource would be nice, because let's be honest, that would be a positive thing. I think in reality, we are starting to manage the demand on that. Obviously, it is dependent on how many more events we have, but we're constantly reviewing that resource, and where possible, we're moving resources to support that team to ensure that those Section 19 reports are more timely. I think we recognise that in the past they've not been as timely as they could have been, so we are working hard to make sure that isn't the case moving forward.
Yeah, I think I've given a little bit of latitude on going away from the agenda item here. Amanda, you've indicated.
I'll put it in writing.
Yeah, I mean, I've given some latitude, but I think, yeah, at the end of the day, this is the recommendations before us are to do with the process around the SRA, not to do with every issue to do with the SRA. I think there comes a point where we just need to focus on the agenda item, if that's okay with colleagues. So we have a number of recommendations regarding our role as the host authority, to review the revised memorandum of understanding, and to review the proposed budget, to release the funding, the reference to our Somerset councillors that sit on the SRA board, and the detailed management of the budget. The case set out in the confidential appendix, and oh, that one's the last. That's the last one is not needed. And on B, just the chief executive just asked me to draw your attention to that we're authorising the lead member for environment and climate change to sign this on behalf of Somerset Council. So I'm sure Dixie has her pen and quill or whatever duly prepared. Do I see a proposer? And those recommendations are proposed and seconded. Councillor Wilkins, and those in favour and those against. David, Kirsty, thank you so much for all the work, and my apologies that I've let the questions go beyond the scope of this paper, but I'm sure you enjoyed answering them. And with so I've just got to advise you that we will be holding a meeting on the 12th of March. So that's a week's time to be looking at a specific agenda item. That will be back here on Tune In next week. Folks, thank you so much for everyone for your contributions this morning, and particular thanks to the Democratic Services team who facilitated the meeting so well. Thank you.